in the quiet streets of New Haven, Indiana. What began as an ordinary night between a married couple soon turned into a scene of horror, a blood-soaked staircase, a frantic call to 911, a husband barely clinging to life, his wife's calm voice telling dispatchers, "Have fell," but nothing about that night felt like an accident. The bruises, broken bones, and her unsettling calmness all suggested something more sinister beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect marriage. Friends who once saw Kevin and Allison Davis as the ideal couple began to wonder, had love turned deadly inside their home on Douglas Lane? By morning, Kevin was dead. Allison was a widow and a suspect. What followed was a tangled story of conflicting accounts, haunting evidence, and one question that still divides their Indiana community: was it a tragic fall or a deliberate murder? Kevin Davis was born on July 1, 1983, to his mother, Alta Beers. From an early age, everyone liked him. His friends described him as kind, hard-working, and always willing to help others. At the age of 40, Kevin worked as a gardener and had a stable life in New Haven, Indiana. One day, he met Allison by chance. They fell in love, got married, and lived together in a house on Douglas Lane. They didn't have children, but adored their pit bull mix, Willow, whom they treated like family. To their friends, Kevin and Allison seemed like a happy couple with a full, active life. Jason Young, a friend of Kevin's, said he could sometimes be loud and opinionated, but it was all part of his personality. Allison worked in retail at Victoria's Secret, where she made everyone feel welcome and valued. She and Kevin often affectionately called each other babe. Everything about their life looked happy and stable. But beneath that surface, something dark was brewing. On the evening of Friday, August 11, 2023, Kevin arrived at East Haven Tavern around 9 p.m. Taking his usual seat at the bar while waiting for Allison to finish work. When she arrived, they greeted each other warmly. Their friend, Jason, was also there, and the three of them enjoyed drinks and laughed all night long. Kevin had a few beers and vodka shots, while Allison sipped her usual sweet cocktail. Bartenders said the night seemed completely ordinary. Around 1 o'clock emission, on August 12, Allison left first, with Kevin following soon after. They both headed home to Douglas Lane, ready to call it a night, but within hours, everything changed. At 1:11 a.m., Kevin texted Jason after getting home. Jason asked if they made it back safely. Kevin apologized and said everything was fine. He was just listening to music. They kept chatting for over an hour, with Kevin sounding cheerful and joking around. Finally, at 2:31 a.m., Kevin sent one last text, saying he was going to put his phone on silent because he needed to go to sleep. Between 2:31 a.m. and 4:38 a.m., something terrifying happened inside Kevin and Allison's home. At 4:38 a.m., Allison called 911. The call lasted about a minute. In a calm tone, she told the dispatcher that her husband had just fallen down the stairs, that there was blood everywhere, and that she couldn't flip him over. She added that she didn't know whether he was alive or dead. Detective James Kruger later said the call sounded rehearsed. Allison never asked dispatchers to hurry, and he believed her tone was more focused on herself than on Kevin. Officers Garrett Shanebrook and Corporal Cade Hetrick arrived within minutes. Allison met them outside and led them in. At the bottom of the staircase, they found Kevin lying face down in a large pool of blood. Blood covered the walls, railing, and floor. With spatter reaching high above the stairs, Kevin was barely breathing, with blood flowing from his nose and mouth. His body temperature was 91 degrees Fahrenheit. dangerously low compared to the normal 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Corporal Cade Hetrick, who witnessed the scene, commented that this didn't look like a fall to him. There were no signs in the house that suggested a hard fall. No damaged railings, broken furniture, or dents in the walls. Kevin's body was lying flat, not twisted or wedged, as one might expect from a fall. The amount of blood made Hetrick ask Allison if there were any firearms in the house. Fearing Kevin might have shot himself, Allison confirmed there were firearms, but none were found near Kevin's body. Paramedics rushed Kevin to Parkview Regional Medical Center, but Allison's behavior immediately struck them as unusual. While talking to paramedics, she was laughing. She didn't seem worried about her husband's injuries. No tears. No attempt to ride in the ambulance. Detective Kruger was present at the scene and began the interrogation. Allison said that around 1:00 a.m., after returning from the bar, she and Kevin got into an argument. Kevin went upstairs to sleep, and she lay on the living room sofa. She said she woke up to a loud noise and found Kevin lying at the bottom of the stairs, thinking he was just drunk and had fallen. Allison agreed to let Kruger search the house and signed a permit. However, she warned him not to enter a room upstairs because of a guard dog named Willow. She said she did not want to go near that room. Kruger agreed not to enter the room where Willow was staying. When he opened the door slightly, Willow growled and bared her teeth. The dog wouldn't let him in. Other than that, the house appeared normal, and Kruger believed Allison's story that Kevin's fall had been a tragic accident caused by intoxication. The crime scene was cleared the same day. Allison's father, Steve Krauser, came over to clean up the blood, wanting to help his daughter in her grief. Meanwhile, Kevin's condition at the hospital worsened. His mother, Alta Beers, had received a text from Allison early that morning saying, "There's been an accident." Alta texted back for details, but got no response and went back to sleep. Assuming it wasn't serious, around 6:30 a.m., Alta finally spoke to Allison by phone and was surprised by how calm she sounded. Allison's tone made Alta believe that everything was fine, but it wasn't. Kevin's friends, Jason and Todd Spessert, hurried to the hospital. They spoke with Allison and her parents. Jason thought Allison had been crying, but was trying to hold herself together. Todd said she looked distraught. Inside Kevin's room, Allison stood by his bedside, calling to him as her father watched helplessly. Kevin suffered his third cardiac arrest that evening. At 10:07 p.m. on August 12, 2023, doctors removed him from life support. 40-year-old Kevin Davis was gone. Allison, 33, was now a widow. Friends were heartbroken. Everyone believed it had to be an accident, a terrible fall. But 3 days later, everything changed. On August 15, 2023, Dr. Scott Wagner performed Kevin's autopsy and discovered devastating injuries. The right side of Kevin's skull was crushed, with several fractures. The injuries were confined to his head. No other trauma was found. Dr. Wagner determined the damage was consistent with a fall from at least 20 feet or a high-speed car crash. The injuries would have rendered Kevin unconscious within seconds and brain-dead upon impact. He concluded that Kevin's wounds could not have been caused by a fall down a normal staircase. The evidence suggested Kevin had been struck in the head with a blunt object. The Allen County Coroner's Office ruled Kevin's death a homicide on October 17, 2023, caused by blunt force trauma to the head. Detective Kruger sat in his office, processing the information. If Kevin was murdered, it meant someone else did it, and the only person with him that night was Allison. Kruger reviewed the text messages between Kevin and Allison. When he read Kevin's last text message to his wife, he felt that there was something unusual about the content, not at all gentle. Kruger sensed tension between them. Then he discovered something even more troubling. Allison had given conflicting accounts of what happened that night. To police, Allison claimed she and Kevin had been drinking and argued after returning home. She said she slept on the couch while Kevin went upstairs. To Kevin's mother, Alta, Allison claimed Kevin had not been drinking and that they had been in bed upstairs when Kevin got up for water and accidentally fell down the stairs. To Kevin's brother, Allison said that she was in bed with her dog, Willow, and heard Kevin moving around but didn't pay attention because Willow was still lying there. She only went to check on Kevin later and found him fallen. And to the medics, Allison said she hadn't heard anything and hadn't seen Kevin for some time before finding his body. The stories contradicted one another, and Kruger believed Allison had been caught lying. Doctors also found something alarming. Kevin's body temperature was so low upon arrival at the hospital that he was hypothermic, and his brain had almost no oxygen. One doctor said she had seen drowning victims with higher oxygen levels than Kevin. This suggested Kevin may have been brain dead for hours before Allison called 911. 4 weeks after Kevin's death, Kruger met with his mother, Alta. She told him that Kevin and Allison were having marital problems and were possibly about to separate. This reinforced Kruger's suspicions. He believed that Allison had lost control and beaten her husband to death, possibly with a blunt object such as a kettlebell, dumbbell, or baseball bat, and then staged the crime by dragging his body down the stairs. However, no weapon was ever recovered. Kruger theorized that it might have been hidden in the upstairs bedroom with Willow, a room he hadn't searched. The thought haunted him. Kruger admitted that he completely regretted not having searched that room on the morning of the 12th, and that the murder weapon could have been there on December 22, 2023. A warrant was issued for Allison's arrest. 3 days before Christmas, she arrived at the Allen County Jail with her parents and told the officers that she was Allison Davis and that she was there to turn herself in. She was handcuffed in front of them. Allison was charged with murder and held without bond. For the next 17 months, she remained in jail, able to see her family only during attorney visits through plexiglass. There were no video calls or regular visits, only waiting. From her cell, Allison told loved ones she couldn't sleep because she kept reliving that morning. She said she missed Kevin deeply and longed to hear him call her babe again. The prosecution believed their case was solid, but the defense saw things differently. On May 6, 2025, Allison Davis went on trial for murder. Chief Deputy Prosecutor Tissa Helge presented Dr. Bill Smoke as her key witness. Dr. Smoke, known for testifying in high-profile cases, including those of Derek Chauvin and Robert Feldman, was described as a police surgeon showing the jury CT scans of Kevin's skull. Dr. Smoke testified that Kevin had suffered multiple blows to various areas of his head. He concluded that Kevin had been beaten to death, not fallen down the stairs, and that a blunt object, possibly a kettlebell, weight, or baseball bat, had likely been used. The prosecution focused on Allison's calm tone during the 911 call, her inconsistent statements, and her behavior with paramedics. They argued that Kevin's body placement at the base of the stairs did not match a natural fall. Crime scene technician Timothy Garrett testified that the blood found in the hallway and living room could not have come from a stair fall, stating that blood cannot turn a corner. Dr. Smock testified that Kevin's low body temperature showed he had been lying there for at least 2 hours before the 911 call. The prosecution claimed Allison had delayed the call to create her story and hide the weapon. The defense, led by attorneys Andrew Baldwin and Max Wiley, countered that there was no murder weapon, physical evidence, or motive. They argued Kevin had been legally intoxicated and fell down the steep stairs, hitting his head on the banister post. For support, They brought in Dr. Visa Dragovic, a forensic neuropathologist specializing in brain injuries. Dr. Dragovic testified that Kevin suffered only one head impact when he hit the banister post. That single, powerful blow shattered his skull in multiple places, causing his brain to bounce inside his head as bone fragments acted like shrapnel. He also disputed the prosecution's interpretation of Kevin's low body temperature. According to Dr. Dragovic, the impact destroyed Kevin's hypothalamus, the part of the brain that regulates temperature, causing his body to cool abnormally. The low temperature, he said, was evidence of severe brain damage, not a delayed emergency call. He explained that the absence of blood on the banister was due to Kevin's internal injuries. The bleeding occurred inside his head and exited only through his nose and mouth. Baldwin criticized the police investigation, pointing out that the crime scene was released the same day. Photos were taken 4 days later, and Allison's father was allowed to clean up blood. Friends described Kevin and Allison's marriage as happy. Jason said Kevin's joking text about his wife was just a joke. Wiley argued that Allison was not the kind of woman who would violently attack her husband. The jury never saw data from Allison's Garmin smartwatch, which the defense claimed supported her version of events. Judge Fran Gull ruled the data inadmissible after 6.5 hours of deliberation on May 9, 2025, around 11:00 p.m. The jury returned a verdict, not guilty. Allison Davis was acquitted of murder. Her father, Steve, watched as she broke down in tears of relief, though she remained in jail briefly for release processing at 2:12 a.m. On May 10, Allison walked out of jail to Cheers after spending 17 months behind bars. Her first meal as a free woman was wings and pizza. An anonymous juror said the reason they acquitted was because the prosecution had no convincing evidence, no weapon, no hard evidence, no way to determine how the crime happened. Dr. Dragovic's testimony helped them better understand Kevin's trauma. Without solid evidence, they couldn't convict Detective Kruger. Now the police chief was devastated. He said that he was 100% convinced Allison had murdered Kevin, adding that his biggest regret was not having searched the bedroom shared with Willow, where he believed the weapon might have been hidden. Kevin's mother, Alta Beers, showed grace, despite her grief. Alta took comfort knowing Kevin's organ donations saved 4 lives. Allison returned to her parents' home with Willow, choosing a quiet life as she tried to rebuild after losing her husband and spending 17 months in jail for a crime. The jury said she didn't commit. Kevin's death remains officially classified as a homicide. The case is still unsolved, and no one has been held accountable. Samantha Vernagallo and Drew Garnier first crossed paths as young adults on Long Island, New York, where they both grew up. While the specifics of their first meeting remain private, it's clear that their connection blossomed during their early 20s. Samantha, who lives in Center Reach, is a former student of Center Reach High School. She is well liked for her warm, caring personality and her dream of raising a happy family. Drew, from nearby Lake Grove, shared her aspirations for a traditional family life. Over time, their bond deepened as they discovered they both envisioned the same future: marriage, children, and building a meaningful life together. Samantha appreciates Drew's stability and commitment to creating a safe living environment. Those who know them see them as a loving couple, working toward a common goal of a happy future. Thanks to the support from their family, both Samantha and Drew grew up mature and did not face any serious issues. Neither had a troubling past. No criminal records, substance abuse, or significant mental health concerns. Drew held steady employment and showed dedication to supporting his growing family, while Samantha was known for her beauty, compassion, and devotion to her loved ones. After several years together, They married and had 2 daughters, Adelina, followed by Izzy. 3 years later, Samantha embraced motherhood wholeheartedly, always putting her daughters first and ensuring they felt safe and loved. As the family grew, they began to feel the financial pressures of living on Long Island, dreaming of a quieter, more affordable life where their daughters could thrive. Samantha and Drew decided to leave Long Island and relocate to Masonville, a small town in Delaware County, New York, situated in the scenic Catskills region, about 150 miles northwest of New York City. Masonville offered the simpler lifestyle they desired: lower living costs, a close-knit community, and a peaceful environment where children could safely play and grow. The family settled into a mobile home on Hook Road, a quiet area where neighbors knew one another and a sense of community prevailed. For Samantha and Drew, the move symbolized a fresh start. Samantha envisioned an idyllic childhood for her daughters, filled with natural beauty, fresh air, and the security of a supportive community. She remained fully committed to her family, caring deeply for her 9-year-old daughter Adelina and 6-year-old Izzy. Drew quickly adapted to the new lifestyle as well, finding work and showing dedication to his family. From the outside, Drew and Samantha Garnier appeared to have a strong marriage and a happy family life. Their life in Masonville seemed stable and focused on building a better future for their 2 daughters. Their joy grew even more when Samantha found out she was pregnant with their 3rd child. By September 2024, she was 5 months along and had learned they were expecting another daughter. For Samantha, this news brought immense happiness. She cherished being a mother and was excited about welcoming another little girl. However, those close to the family noticed that Drew's reaction to the news was quite different. While Samantha celebrated the idea of another daughter, Drew had been hoping for a son. Family members later revealed that Drew's desire for a boy had intensified with each pregnancy. Hearing they would have a 3rd daughter deeply disappointed him and seemed to affect him in ways that no one could have foreseen. Despite this hidden tension, there were no visible signs that Drew was capable of violence. He had no criminal record, history of domestic abuse, or encounters with law enforcement. To their neighbors, their family was an ordinary family, adapting to life in a small town. Samantha, although noticing subtle changes in Drew's behavior, remained focused on her family and the upcoming birth of their 3rd daughter in February 2025. She also looked forward to celebrating her 30th birthday, just 2 weeks away. Life in their family household carried on as usual during late summer and early fall of 2024. Adelina and Izzy, the daughters, went to school each day. Samantha managed the house while preparing for the new baby, and Drew went to work. Anyone observing the family would have seen a picture of normalcy, but underneath, Drew's disappointment about the baby's gender was quietly festering. With no outward signs of trouble, no calls to the police or family interventions, no one could have predicted the tragedy that was about to unfold. Those who later tried to understand Drew's actions were baffled. On the surface, he seemed to have everything: a loving wife, 2 healthy daughters, steady employment, and another child on the way. Samantha had built a life filled with love and stability for their family, but for reasons no one could fathom, the good things in Drew's life became a source of anger. On the night of Wednesday, September 4th, 2024, just days after Labor Day, their household appeared to be winding down from a normal day. Adelina and Izzy were likely getting ready for bed, and Samantha, 5 months pregnant, was caring for her daughters and preparing for the evening. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but beneath the surface, Drew's frustrations had reached their breaking point. At around 11:29 p.m., the quiet town of Masonville was jolted by an emergency that shocked the entire community. Drew called 911 to report what he described as a domestic dispute at their family home. To the dispatcher, Drew sounded like a man trying to help his wife. He claimed Samantha had been injured and that he was applying pressure to her wounds to stop the bleeding. However, when police arrived at the scene, they discovered a horrifying scene that was completely opposite to what Drew described, permanently shattering the image of a peaceful family. New York State Police troopers Corey King and Ronald King were dispatched to respond to an emergency call. When the troopers arrived at the mobile home with its covered porch, they were prepared to assist what they believed was an injured woman. Instead, they were confronted with an unthinkable scene. As they approached, Drew briefly stuck his head out the front door before quickly retreating inside. His suspicious behavior immediately alerted the troopers that something was wrong. Shortly after, a single gunshot echoed from inside the house, sending shockwaves through the officers. They quickly retreated to the end of the driveway and called for backup from a Delaware County Sheriff's deputy, using the deputy's patrol car as cover. The officers cautiously approached the house again. Suddenly, Adelina, a 9-year-old girl, emerged from the home, running toward the police with her clothes soaked in blood. The officers' hearts sank as they realized this child had witnessed unimaginable violence. Through tears, Adelina told the officers that her mother had been stabbed and that her father, Drew, was still inside the house with a gun. As they worked to protect Adelina, her 6-year-old sibling, Izzy, also ran out, similarly covered in blood. Both sisters were deeply affected by the horrific events that had just occurred. Despite being injured and in shock, they still tried to talk to the police. The officers provided first aid to the children and called for additional medical assistance. It was clear that both girls had endured a horrific ordeal. Once they were safely transported to receive medical care, the focus turned back to Drew inside the house. The officers called out for him to surrender, and to their surprise, he walked out of the home with his hands raised. Drew was immediately arrested without resistance. The officers noted he was covered in blood and had cuts on his hands. During his arrest, police found a butter knife in his pocket, a chilling piece of evidence that would later shed light on the brutal events of that night. Inside the house, the officers found Samantha lying on her side, critically injured with multiple stab wounds. Despite their efforts to provide life-saving aid, it was clear her injuries were severe. Emergency medical personnel arrived, and Samantha was airlifted to Wilson Medical Center in Johnson City. Both daughters, Izzy and Adelina, were flown to Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse as well, due to the severity of their injuries. Investigators later determined that all 3 victims had been subjected to a prolonged and brutal attack. Tragically, Samantha succumbed to her injuries and was pronounced dead at the hospital. She was only 29 years old and just 2 weeks away from her 30th birthday. Her unborn daughter, whom she had been 5 months pregnant with, also did not survive. Adelina and Izzy remained hospitalized in serious condition but were expected to recover physically. However, the emotional trauma they endured would require extensive therapy and support for years. Drew was transported to A.O. Fox Hospital for treatment of superficial self-inflicted wounds. After receiving care, he was processed at the New York State Police Barracks in Sydney. He was charged and faced full legal accountability for the horrific attack. The investigation that followed was detailed and exhaustive, led by New York State Police, with support from the Delaware County Sheriff's Office and local law enforcement agencies. Major Lucas Shooter, commander of Troop C, held a press conference on September 6, 2024, to provide new information regarding the arrest and charges in the case. What made this case particularly unsettling for investigators was that it marked the first time the state police had been called to Samantha and Drew's residence for a domestic issue. There were no prior reports, no history of domestic violence, and no indication that Drew was capable of such violence toward his own family. As the investigation progressed, police discovered additional alarming evidence. A search of the property revealed that Drew owned multiple firearms and 2 high-capacity ammunition-feeding devices. These findings led to weapons-related charges being added to the list of crimes he faced. On September 5, 2024, Drew Garnier was officially charged with second-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder. He was arraigned at Delhi-Town Court and sent to the Delaware County Jail without bail. Recognizing the gravity of the case, Delaware County District Attorney Shah Smith quickly convened an emergency grand jury session. On September 11, 2024, the grand jury issued an 8-count indictment against Drew. In addition to the original charges, the indictment included weapons violations, second-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, criminal use of a firearm, and multiple counts of illegal weapon possession. Drew pleaded not guilty to all charges at his arraignment before Delaware County Court. Judge John L. Hubbard, who ordered him to remain in the custody of the Delaware County Sheriff's Office without bail. If convicted on all charges, Drew faced a potential sentence of 25 years to life in prison. However, as the case advanced, it became evident that going to trial would force his daughters, Adelina and Izzy, to relive the trauma of that horrific night by testifying. To prevent further emotional harm to the girls, prosecutors opted for a negotiated plea deal. On March 25, 2025, Drew pleaded guilty to reduced charges of first-degree manslaughter and 2 counts of first-degree assault in exchange for a total sentence of 30 years in state prison, followed by 15 years of post-release supervision. District Attorney Smith explained that, although the sentence was lower than the maximum possible sentence, the agreement was in the best interests of Izzy and Adelina. The sentencing hearing took place on May 13, 2025, in Delaware County Court. The courtroom was filled with family members, community members, and court officials. During the hearing, only one victim impact statement was read, that of Samantha's father, Gregory Vernagallo. He provided critical insight into what had driven the crime. Gregory informed the court that Drew had wanted a boy and became furious when he found out Samantha was pregnant with their 3rd daughter. He explained that this shocking revelation, that gender disappointment had motivated such horrific violence, had added a deeply disturbing dimension to an already tragic case. He also shared that he had adopted his 2 granddaughters and devoted his life to raising them, stating that he was their father now and would protect them. He added that he hadn't left their sides since the attack. When given the chance to speak, Drew addressed the court with apparent remorse and expressed his regret to his in-laws, especially his children. He also expressed hope that someday he could make amends with his kids. He said he would not force anything on them and respected their decisions, but added that if they ever wanted to see him, he hoped he would be allowed to be there for them. Public defender Joseph Hermeti emphasized the lack of logic behind the crime, stating that his client, Drew, had no explanation for what had happened. Joseph described the situation as extremely tragic and mentioned that he didn't believe anyone would disagree with that assessment. Judge John L. Hubbard considered Drew's clean record before sentencing him. The judge said Drew had taken the life of his wife and harmed his children, who were entitled to his protection, and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. During the hearing, Drew asked for permission to continue contact with his daughters, Izzy and Adelina, while incarcerated. Delaware County District Attorney Shah Smith strongly opposed the request, urging the court to impose the longest possible no-contact orders. Judge John agreed and issued stay-away orders for both Izzy and Adelina until 2056, which is 8 years beyond Drew's maximum potential release date. The judge added that if the daughters ever wished to contact their father, they could petition the court to revise the protective orders. Drew refused to sign the court orders, but they were served to him in court regardless. His refusal was seen as further resistance to accepting responsibility for his actions against his children. This heartbreaking case has had devastating consequences for all involved. Samantha and Drew's 2 daughters, Adelina and Izzy, are now orphans because of their father's actions. The girls are now legally adopted by their grandfather Gregory and have moved to a new home to settle down and receive better care. A GoFundMe campaign organized by Aaron Leahy from Center raised over $16,000 to support Izzy and Adelina. The campaign described Samantha, the girl's mother, as compassionate and loving. It revealed that Samantha was pregnant with a baby girl due in February 2025 and was just weeks away from celebrating her 30th birthday when her life was tragically cut short. The crime shocked the residents of Masonville, a small, peaceful community where such acts of violence are extremely rare. District Attorney Sean Smith commended law enforcement for their diligent investigation and dedication. He mentioned that what made the case especially chilling was the lack of any warning signs that could have foreshadowed such violence. Drew Garnier had no prior criminal record, mental health issues, or prior interactions with law enforcement. The revelation that gender disappointment over an unborn child could escalate to the murder of a pregnant wife and an attack on his daughters serves as a sobering reminder of how domestic violence can erupt without any prior indications. Nanette Krentel grew up in New Orleans in a humble, close-knit family. Her parents, Dan and Pat Watson, raised her along with her siblings Kim, Eliza, and 3 half-siblings and taught her important values of loyalty and kindness, known for her gentle and caring nature. Nanette had a deep love for animals and shared her home with 2 cats and a dog. Despite moving away, she maintained a close bond with her family, especially her father and sisters, speaking with them daily. In 1994, at 27 years old, Nanette met Steve Krentel while applying for a job at his office supply store. Steve, then 28, owned both a scuba gear business and the store, and was going through a divorce at the time. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and after Steve finalized his divorce, he introduced Nanette to his young son, Justin. By 1995, they were married. Steve's native of Louisiana. He grew up near Lacombe and reportedly had a tense relationship with his brother, Brian. In 2000, Steve and Nanette moved to Lacombe, closer to his parents. He gradually worked his way up in the Tammany Parish Fire Department, eventually becoming the fire chief. Respected for his professionalism, his career in the fire department provided him with financial security and influence in the community. In 1997, after Steve sold both of his businesses, Nanette shifted her career path. She began working at a daycare center, where her kind and attentive nature earned the trust of parents and co-workers. Beyond her job, she became involved in the community, organizing fundraisers and charitable events, as well as supporting local fire departments by selling handmade ceramics and baked goods. By 2017, she had been out of the workforce for several years, focusing instead on her home, her pets, and continued community involvement. Although she had no children, Nanette was always concerned and attentive to the lives of her loved ones. She often played a central role in family matters, offering emotional and financial support to her loved ones. To outsiders, she and Steve seemed to lead a peaceful life, residing on 100 acres of scenic remote property in Lacombe. However, behind closed doors, Nanette grew increasingly concerned for her safety after Steve's brother, Brian, was released from prison. Brian allegedly blamed Nanette for the legal issues that led to his incarceration and had made direct threats against her. In response, she urged for additional security measures, having cameras installed around the property and keeping protective tools in her bedroom, car, and purse. She openly shared her fears with her family. Her father and sisters, aware of the escalating tension, were alarmed but did not anticipate just how grave the situation would become. Steve was also concerned and worked with Nanette to increase security. He installed additional cameras, purchased self-defense equipment, and even practiced shooting with her at a local shooting range. However, despite these precautions, the simmering problems in their family did not go away. Behind the facade of a peaceful life, there were bitter family conflicts, growing tensions, and the choices ahead led to unforeseen consequences. On July 14, 2017, at around 2:30 p.m., the St. Tammany Parish Fire Department received an urgent call from Steve's cousin, who lived nearby. He reported seeing thick smoke rising from Steve's property and suspected the house was on fire. Despite the distance between their homes and the dense forest in between, the fire was visible from afar. Steve and his team arrived at the scene around 3 p.m. when the house was engulfed in flames. firefighters worked into the evening to extinguish the fire, only to discover human remains in the bathroom of the master bedroom. The damage was extensive, but the location of the remains and the fact that no one else lived there indicated the victim was likely Nanette, Steve's wife. No alarms had sounded, and throughout the day, Steve's repeated calls to both Nanette's cell phone and the house landline had gone unanswered. Her car remained in the garage, further confirming she had been home at the time of the fire. Tragically, all the household pets also perished, reflecting the sudden and intense nature of the flames. Federal fire investigation specialists joined the inquiry. Initially, the fire was considered a possible accident, but the circumstances surrounding Nanette's death raised suspicions. Her remains were found in the bathroom, and there was no indication she had tried to escape. This prompted a forensic autopsy, which included DNA testing and an investigation into the cause of death. About a week later, during a memorial service, part of the coroner's preliminary findings became public. It was revealed that Nanette had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, with a bullet found in her skull. This discovery completely shifted the direction of the investigation. On July 18th, the sheriff confirmed the findings, apologized for the delay in communication, and acknowledged evidence of a criminal act. Further autopsy results showed no smoke inhalation in Nanette's lungs, proving that she had died before the fire. Since no weapon was found near her body, the possibility of self-inflicted injuries has been ruled out. The investigation further revealed the presence of 9 security cameras on the property, but Steve stated that the system had stopped functioning several days before the fire. Efforts to recover footage from the damaged equipment were unsuccessful. This lack of evidence, combined with forensic findings, suggested the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence. Investigators shifted their focus to individuals who might have had both motive and access to the property. However, an official statement confirming foul play in Nanette's death was not released until 4 days after the fire. The family's frustration with the investigation grew, particularly because the coroner had noted the gunshot wound the day after the incident, yet this information wasn't immediately shared with them. Nanette's sister, Kim, a prosecutor in Nebraska, publicly criticized the investigation, pointing to the lack of proper scene containment, which may have compromised evidence. When Nanette's relatives arrived in Louisiana shortly after the tragedy, they found the property unsecured and the house open. Within 2 days, Steve was allowed to return to the site, raising concerns about evidence being altered or lost. It wasn't until Steve's son, Justin, discovered a fragment of a human skull in the debris that authorities finally secured the scene. The incident has left the public losing confidence in Sheriff Randy Smith's department. While federal investigators conduct an independent analysis, they discovered multiple points of ignition and traces of accelerants, confirming the fire was deliberately set. Despite these findings, however, the sheriff did not rule out the possibility that Julie harmed herself, citing the lack of a recovered weapon and inconclusive ballistics test results. Later, 2 firearms were found in the remains of the home, but neither could be definitively linked to the fatal shot. The bullet recovered from Nanette's skull was too damaged for reliable analysis. Additional forensic tests reinforced previous findings, including finding no smoke in Nanette's lungs and no food in her stomach. Despite her having been seen purchasing food at a fast food restaurant that morning, additional inconsistencies came to light during the investigation. There was no blood on Nanette's gunshot wound to the head, as is often the case, leading to speculation that her body may have been moved after her death. An independent expert suggested that whoever moved her was likely familiar with the layout of the house. The sheriff, however, publicly disputed the forensic expert's conclusions. This discrepancy with the findings of federal agents further undermined public confidence in the investigation. Nanette's family began openly questioning the integrity of local authorities and raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest. As discrepancies mounted, the sheriff was eventually compelled to issue a public statement, acknowledging that Nanette's death resulted from a violent act. Despite this admission, the investigation failed to identify the person responsible. The case shifted towards exploring possible motives and suspects with access to the property. Nanette's husband, Steve, was naturally a key subject of interest due to his unrestricted access to the house. He willingly cooperated, volunteered for a polygraph test, and passed. However, since polygraph results are not entirely reliable, investigators didn't eliminate him as a suspect. Steve's alibi was backed by fire department security footage confirming he was at work on the day of the incident, starting at 8 a.m., and didn't leave at any point, including during lunch. This was corroborated by surveillance footage and his co-workers' testimonies. However, it was noted that Steve, working on a Friday, was unusual, as he usually took that day off. Investigators also analyzed Nanette's movements on the morning of July 14th. Traffic cameras spotted her driving between her home and a nearby fast food restaurant, where her bank card was used to buy food. Her car was later seen near her house. About an hour later, a phone call was made from Nanette's phone to an unfamiliar number. The person on the other end claimed not to know her, and the reason for the call remains unexplained. Investigators explored potential personal conflicts and discovered that Steve had been in an extramarital relationship with a colleague. Nanette was aware of the affair and had told others she was considering divorce, which under state law would involve dividing their shared assets, an arrangement that could have been financially disadvantageous for Steve. When questioned, Steve admitted to the affair but claimed the couple had reconciled and planned to stay together. Close family members were also questioned. Steve's son, Justin, had reportedly experienced tension with his stepmother, Julie. In the past, family acquaintances described him as having unusual interests, including a fascination with firearms. However, Justin provided documentation proving he was out of state for work on the day of the incident, which was verified, ruling him out as a suspect. Investigators also looked into Steve's brother, Brian, who had a criminal record and a history of family conflicts. Over the years, Nanette had voiced concerns about his behavior. Shortly after his release from prison, she sent her sister a message describing a specific threat from him, in which he allegedly displayed aggressiveness and hinted at setting the house on fire. These claims were corroborated through their text exchanges. Surveillance footage from their parents' home showed Brian did not leave the premises on the day of Nanette's death. However, a wearable tracking device issued to him malfunctioned and failed to record any location data that day, with the cause of this failure unexplained. Another puzzling incident occurred a month before Nanette's death. A security camera recorded an unidentified man near the entrance gate of the property. He left behind a cigarette butt and a knife. Nanette informed her father about the incident, but the man's identity remained unclear and no investigation was conducted to find out more. After investigating multiple leads, the case remained unsolved. Every suspect either had a confirmed alibi or there wasn't enough evidence to make a formal accusation, leaving the investigation at a dead end. 2 months after Nanette's death, the sheriff made another public announcement. He declared that Steve was no longer a person of interest in the case, explaining that Steve's alibi had been verified. There was no clear motive, and the evidence was deemed insufficient to move forward. However, Nanette's family felt this announcement was premature, as not all digital records had been reviewed. Several witnesses had yet to be re-interviewed, and a detailed timeline of her phone activity leading up to her death was still incomplete. It appeared the investigation was entering a state of stagnation. When Nanette's family requested access to the case documents, their attempts were met with vague responses. Louisiana state law restricts access to investigative materials to the closest next of kin, which in this case was Steve, not Nanette's parents or sisters. Steve did not share these documents with the rest of the family. In search of answers, Nanette's relatives turned to private attorneys and independent forensic experts. One expert, after examining the available evidence, identified signs of deliberate investigative mismanagement, noting that critical protocols for handling cases involving violent deaths and burnt evidence had been disregarded. The conclusions and methodologies of the private experts sharply contrasted with those of the local authorities. Efforts to transfer the case to a different jurisdiction proved unsuccessful. Appeals to the district attorney's office were dismissed, with officials citing a lack of legal justification to relocate the investigation. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Nanette's family turned to social media, launching a page to provide updates and highlight inconsistencies in the investigation, in the hope of pressuring authorities into action. However, the sheriff's actions became a significant obstacle to achieving transparency. His public statements, dismissal of expert findings, and personal connections to individuals potentially linked to the case raised concerns about his impartiality and deepened public mistrust. Despite multiple individuals with potential motives, the investigation failed to reach a definite conclusion. Detectives worked on verifying alibis, analyzing technical records, and identifying gaps in the official narrative. But these efforts often revealed inconsistencies that undermined the credibility of the evidence. A key issue was the absence of location data from the Jeep's-enabled ankle monitor worn by Brian. On July 14th, the day of the incident, the monitor registered no location data, an unexplained blackout. Authorities were unable to determine whether the failure was a technical error or whether the monitor had been intentionally disabled. This missing data represented a major accountability failure and raised serious questions. Another troubling discovery came from a review of footage from a security camera inside Brian's parents' home. The video depicted Brian with a working desk lamp and a visible wall clock in the background, ostensibly providing an alibi. However, Nanette's family questioned the authenticity of this footage, suggesting it could have been pre-recorded or staged. Experts also observed that the angle and focus of the camera appeared unusual for a standard household surveillance setup. Additional uncertainty arose with surveillance footage from a fast food establishment showing Nanette's vehicle. Investigators assumed she was driving the car that morning, but the video quality was too poor to verify her identity. This assumption was based solely on her bank card being used to make a purchase nearby. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was no footage from her home surveillance system on the day of the incident. Steve claimed the cameras had not been operational at the time, but investigators later found traces of accelerant on the damaged equipment. Experts concluded that the security system had likely been intentionally tampered with before the fire, suggesting someone with knowledge of the camera's locations and purpose had interfered. After Nanette's father passed away, her sisters took the lead in demanding a proper investigation. They launched an online awareness campaign, collaborated with advocacy groups, and participated in discussions on crime-focused platforms. The family repeatedly urged state authorities to transfer the case to an independent investigative body, but their requests were consistently met with generic responses that lacked meaningful action. They were also frustrated by the investigators' failure to review footage from the citywide surveillance system, which could have offered critical context. These shortcomings formed the basis of formal complaints to the district attorney's office. Although officials promised to keep the case open, there was no evidence of real progress, receiving minimal support from local law enforcement. Nanette's family shifted their focus to building a network of allies. They connected with organizations specializing in unresolved cases, which led to increased attention on Nanette's death through podcasts, videos, and media coverage. By 2024, the case remained unsolved. However, new hope appeared when Colin Sims was elected district attorney. Colin publicly expressed his willingness to review the evidence, marking the first sign of possible investigative progress after nearly 7 years of inaction. As of March 2024, Nanette's case was still open, with no charges filed against any suspects. Despite coroner findings, witness testimonies, and independent assessments, authorities in St. Tammany Parish had yet to identify any responsible parties. What initially seemed like a straightforward case had instead devolved into a prolonged stalemate. By mid-2025, the case records were still sealed, and only individuals with legal standing, such as Nanette's husband, Steve, were granted access. The family remained barred from reviewing complete investigative reports, transcripts, or relevant surveillance data. Repeated appeals to state authorities went unanswered. In response, a grassroots group formed by Nanette's friends and family continued to provide social media updates, urging the public to come forward with any useful information. The family also sought assistance from federal agencies like the Department of Justice. In their letters, they raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest involving local authorities and petitioned for the case to be transferred to a higher jurisdiction. Independent experts consulted by the family identified numerous investigative avenues that had not been fully explored, including recovering deleted digital records and re-interviewing key witnesses. However, without official investigative authority, these proposals could not be enforced. Despite years of stagnation, Nanette's family has never stopped fighting for answers. For them, this is about more than personal grief. It is a pursuit of justice. The lack of progress has only strengthened their resolve. They firmly believe the truth can still be uncovered if independent expertise is brought in and the case is reviewed impartially. As of this report, the case remains open but inactive. Nanette Krentel's story highlights how errors, delays, and possible bias can obstruct justice in a major case. Yet, it also demonstrates the unwavering resilience of a family determined to keep her memory alive. Their goal remains unchanged: to uncover the truth, no matter how much time has passed or how many obstacles stand in their way. The mother of two disappeared mysteriously, she sending alarming messages to her family before she vanished. Police began investigating immediately, trying to understand conflicting information. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn, revealing a shocking story that would captivate the nation. Katie Kenyon was born in Burnley, a small town in Britain. She had two very close sisters. Even as a child, Katie was known for her kindness and generosity, always willing to help others. Later, she married and had two children, a son and a daughter. Sadly, her husband left, and although he occasionally visited the children, Katie raised them on her own. It was difficult, as her job as a social care worker didn't pay much, but Katie always made sure her children had everything they needed. On April 22, 2022, 33-year-old Katie followed her normal morning routine, preparing her children for school and sending them off. Later that day, around noon, Katie's mother received a strange text message from her. Katie stated she needed to get away for a while to clear her head. Her mother immediately tried calling her, but the call went directly to voicemail. The idea that she would abandon everything, especially her children, seemed completely out of character. Katie's mother contacted Katie's sister, Sarah Kenyon Holden. They rushed over to her house and noticed that her car was gone. Using a spare key, they let themselves inside and found all of Katie's belongings right where she'd left them, except for her phone and handbag. It just didn't add up. The idea that Katie had taken off somewhere, leaving behind almost everything she owned, felt completely wrong. Something was off. Soon after, Katie's children arrived home from school and shared something concerning. They had both received odd text messages, supposedly from their mother. In the texts, Katie stated she needed help to become a better mother and instructed them to contact their father to care for them during her absence. Upon reading these messages, Sarah immediately suspected they weren't written by her. Firstly, the tone was unlike Katie's usual way of speaking. More significantly, the word "while" was misspelled in both texts, which was highly unusual for Katie, as she never made such errors. Katie had mentioned Andrew Burfield, Katie's ex-boyfriend of several years, in messages to her children, saying he would care for them if their father couldn't. Sarah contacted Andrew. He told her he hadn't seen Katie since the previous day because he'd been at work. He stated that Katie texted him around 2 p.m. that day, informing him that she was leaving her car, keys, and bank card in his mailbox. Andrew claimed This was to repay the 6,000 British pound she owed him for past anxiety treatment. However, Sarah completely disbelieved Andrew's account. Katie's son then mentioned that Andrew had contacted him on social media. Andrew's message stated that Katie had checked into a clinic and asked him to care for her dog until she returned. This struck Katie's mother and Sarah as odd. While they knew Katie and Andrew had a long, turbulent relationship, they believed it was over. Therefore, it seemed strange that Katie would inform Andrew of her plans while neglecting to tell her own mother or children. So, Sarah and her boyfriend decided to drive over to Andrew's place and investigate. The moment they pulled up, she spotted Katie's car parked outside. Inside, she could see Katie's purse and other personal belongings, which only heightened her suspicion. She knocked on Andrew's door, hoping to talk to him face to face, but he refused to open it and told them to leave. The whole thing felt incredibly off. Sarah didn't understand why Andrew seemed so uncooperative. Her boyfriend ended up threatening to kick the door down if he didn't let them in, but Andrew just called the police instead. A few minutes later, officers arrived and spoke with Katie's sister first. She laid everything out, how the family was worried sick, and how they didn't believe for a second that Katie would just vanish without saying a word to anyone. She also pointed out her sister's car still parked there with her stuff inside. After that, the police knocked on Andrew's door. He gave them the same story he told over the phone, that he'd been at work when Katie texted him about leaving her car, keys, and bank card, and said she was going to check herself into a clinic. He even let them search his house and his van, and they didn't find anything suspicious. So, the police left, but they did open a missing persons case. Just to cover all bases, they called around to a bunch of clinics, hoping maybe Katie really had checked herself in somewhere, but not a single one had seen her. The next morning, police began piecing together a timeline of Katie's disappearance. And naturally, all eyes were on Andrew's house, since that's where her car had been found. Detectives learned there was a surveillance camera nearby, so they pulled the footage from the previous couple of days. On April 21st, the day before Katie went missing, she was seen pulling up to Andrew's house. The footage showed her getting into his van, kissing him and smiling. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But the next morning, at 9:20 a.m., things took a very different turn. That was the day Andrew told police he'd been at work when Katie supposedly dropped off her car, but the footage showed otherwise. It clearly showed Katie arriving at his house, getting out of her car and climbing into the passenger seat of Andrew's van. And right there behind the wheel was Andrew himself. Police immediately checked traffic cameras along the direction the van had gone. This time, the van stopped at a McDonald's, then headed out toward the highway. The final footage showed Andrew turning onto a rural back road leading into a wooded area. After that, the van disappeared from view for nearly an hour, but then it popped up again. This time, though, there was only one person in the vehicle. So, now, a much darker picture was starting to form. Based on the footage, it looked like Andrew had driven Katie out to a wooded area and then left without her. The police pulled location data from Katie's phone on the day she went missing. The record showed that her phone disconnected from the tower near her house early that morning, then reconnected near Andrew's home. From there, the phone's path followed the exact route the van had taken. According to the location data, Katie's phone was still in the van as it headed back towards Andrew's place. The problem was Katie was no longer in the van. And then came the final piece. Investigators checked the time those strange messages were sent to Katie's mom and kids. And by that point, Andrew had already returned home alone. But location data clearly showed that those texts were sent from his house. Given that all the evidence directly contradicted Andrew's version of events, police decided to head back to his house. The moment they stepped inside, something felt off. The place was boiling hot. Turns out Andrew had fired up the wood, burning stove, despite the weather being pretty mild outside. Right away, detectives suspected he might have been trying to destroy some evidence. But by the time they got there, all that was left in the stove was ash. Even so, they arrested Andrew and brought him in for questioning. Surprisingly, He didn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he looked completely relaxed and stuck to his original story, claiming Katie had probably checked herself into a clinic to deal with her anxiety. When detectives started pressing for more answers, he shut down completely and said he wouldn't talk without a lawyer. So, once again, they were left with nothing. After the interrogation, police decided to launch a large-scale search operation in the forest, where Katie's phone had last pinged right before Andrew was seen driving back alone. Covering that area, however, wasn't an easy task. They were looking at roughly 25 miles of rugged terrain. Still, they pulled in dozens of officers, requested backup from other agencies, and headed out into the woods. Soon they had helicopters with thermal imaging, drones, specialized equipment, and even a team of divers. Volunteers joined in too. The search quickly became one of the biggest operations their town had ever seen. But even with all that manpower, it still wasn't enough to cover such a huge area. Then, out of nowhere, police got a tip. Someone had seen Andrew's van parked in a specific part of the forest. That changed everything. Now that they had a likely spot, they were able to narrow the search down to a 5-mile radius. As the search teams combed through the forest, detectives brought Andrew in for another round of questioning. This time, they laid out the surveillance footage and other evidence they had gathered. Faced with the facts, Andrew changed his story. He admitted that he and Katie had driven out to the woods, but what he said next left investigators baffled. According to Andrew, the two of them went there to have a picnic. He claimed Katie had a habit of writing down her thoughts in a journal and then burning the pages as a way to let go of things that were bothering her. He insisted that morning had been no different. They had a picnic, lit a small fire. She burned a few pages, and then he drove home. He said he didn't know what happened to Katie after that. Of course, detectives didn't buy Andrew's story, but the problem was they still didn't have any solid leads. The search teams had come up empty, and with no trace of Katie in the woods, investigators shifted their focus to her relationship with Andrew. According to Katie's family, she had met him 3 years earlier. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage, worked in construction, and at first he seemed like a reliable, stable guy. But it didn't take long for her loved ones to notice cracks in the relationship. Andrew had a habit of trying to control Katie, telling her how to act, how to talk, even how to think. He also constantly brought up her anxiety, using it as a way to dismiss anything she said or did that he didn't like. And over time, that pressure only made her anxiety worse. Eventually, Andrew offered to pay for her treatment, and Katie agreed. But as time went on, things just kept getting worse. The fights became more frequent, more intense. Eventually, the relationship fell apart. For Katie, breaking up felt like a weight off her shoulders, but for Andrew, it was something he just couldn't accept. Not long after they split, Katie discovered someone had slashed the tires on her car. She was certain it was Andrew, but she never reported it to the police. A few months before, Katie went missing. She got a letter from the court saying she owed Andrew £4,000, the amount he'd spent on her treatment. Katie was already struggling to cover basic expenses for her and her kids. She had no idea how she'd come up with that kind of money. Over time, late fees piled on, and the debt grew to £6,000. The whole situation sent her anxiety through the roof. She was terrified she'd lose her home, the only stable place her kids had. But more than anything, she was afraid of Andrew. In one message to her mom, Katie said she was scared of him and genuinely believed he might hurt her. Still, just a month before she disappeared, Andrew reached out to her. He told her he regretted ever taking her to court. He promised to drop the case and even said he'd pay all the extra fees that had built up since the ruling. Andrew apologized for his anger, told her he wanted to change, and eventually Katie forgave him. Despite everything, they got back together. Still, detectives found something even more disturbing. Just one day after Andrew promised to fix everything with the court, he actually called the debt collectors and told them to go harder on Katie. He wanted them to push her even more. Investigators believe this was all part of his plan to increase the pressure on her. making her even more dependent on him. Katie, of course, had no idea this was happening because Andrew kept telling her he was working on canceling the whole thing. This gave detectives an even darker picture of the situation. All the evidence pointed to one conclusion: Andrew was a skilled manipulator and a compulsive liar who would do anything to get his way. Soon, detectives received further confirmation of this theory. People who knew him corroborated this, telling investigators that Andrew had a knack for getting inside people's heads and controlling them, something he had been doing for years, even with those closest to him. Despite all this, police still had no clue where Katie was. The search dragged on, day after day, without a trace. But then, finally, investigators caught a break. A local man came forward with a strange story. He said that the morning after Katie went missing, Andrew randomly showed up at his house. They were strangers, but Andrew approached him and asked a bizarre question. "Do you know when your bins were last emptied?" This immediately raised red flags. Officers rushed to the man's property and discovered that the trash bins hadn't been collected in several days. They started digging through the garbage, and inside one of the bags, they found something chilling: sandals stained with blood. A DNA test confirmed the blood was Katie's. At that point, detectives were certain of one thing: Katie was dead, and Andrew was officially charged with her murder. But a huge problem remained. They had no idea where her body was. Shortly after being formally charged, Andrew told detectives he wanted to talk. He changed his story yet again. This time, Andrew claimed he and Katie had gone to the woods that morning for a picnic. While sitting by a fire, Katie supposedly spotted a hatchet he'd used to chop wood and jokingly dared him to throw it at a soda can she was holding a few feet away. Andrew said he accepted the dare, but as he threw the hatchet, Katie suddenly leaned forward, and it struck her in the back of the head. Of course, detectives didn't believe a word of it, but this time, Andrew at least admitted the location of her body. He claimed that when Katie collapsed and died, he panicked. There was no cell service in that part of the forest, and he said he didn't have the strength to carry her back to the van. So, he decided to bury her there to prevent animals from getting to her body. He said he dug a shallow grave, placed Katie's body inside, and covered it with leaves and branches, marking the spot by tying a plastic bag to a stick, planning to return later. He also admitted to burning Katie's phone and some of her other belongings in his fireplace, then scooping up the charred remains and dumping them in a trash bin somewhere around town. After speaking with Andrew, police returned to his house, hoping to uncover new evidence. This time, forensic experts managed to find traces of Katie's blood inside his washing machine. Meanwhile, the search for Katie's body continued. Investigators focused on locating the stick with the plastic bag Andrew claimed he'd used to mark the burial site. But even with that clue, search teams couldn't find the exact spot. While the search was underway, detectives uncovered something else. After investigating Andrew's online activity, they found that he'd been communicating with numerous women on various dating sites, flirting with practically anyone who responded. He'd even been seeing at least one woman in person. According to their conversations, Andrew had told her he owned multiple properties across the country. They were even discussing moving to Scotland together and buying a house. But that wasn't the most significant discovery. As they continued examining his phone, investigators discovered something that changed everything. Based on Jeep's data, the day before Katie vanished, Andrew had stopped by his parents' house, then turned off his phone for about an hour and a half. During that time, his van was captured on several surveillance cameras heading toward the woods. After speaking to Andrew's parents, police learned that the morning before Katie went missing, he'd borrowed a shovel. That's when it clicked. Andrew had likely gone to the woods that day to dig her grave in advance. The next day, after killing Katie and using her phone to message her kids and family, Andrew also texted his other girlfriend using his own phone, telling her that something had come up with his kids and that he'd have to cancel their date. But there was more. In the Notes app on his phone, investigators found something even more disturbing: drafts of the exact same messages he'd sent to Katie's children and mother. Digital forensics showed that he'd been editing those drafts over several weeks. tweaking them repeatedly to match Katie's writing style so no one would suspect anything. Most tellingly, the word "while" was misspelled in the exact same way it appeared in the final messages. It's also important to note that the note had been created over a month before the murder, proving one thing beyond any doubt: Andrew didn't just snap. He'd been planning this for weeks, perhaps even longer, carefully laying the groundwork for something he knew he was going to do. When police confronted Andrew with the evidence that he'd been in the woods the day before the murder, he claimed he had only gone there to walk his dog, not to dig a grave. Soon after, search teams finally found the stick and the plastic bag Andrew had mentioned, but there was no grave anywhere nearby. They scoured the area inch by inch, but came up empty-handed. On April 29th, the detectives brought Andrew out to the woods and asked him to show them exactly where he had buried Katie. Once they arrived, Andrew pointed to a specific patch of ground. The ground looked completely undisturbed, flat, smooth, and totally natural. There were no signs of digging, no shifted soil, nothing out of place. It had been concealed so well that officers later admitted they would never have found it without Andrew's help. As soon as the forensic team began digging, they found Katie. But what they uncovered next was unexpected. Andrew had somehow managed to bury her beneath a web of tree roots growing deep underground. Later, a geology expert explained the complexity of the grave. According to him, it would have taken hours to dig something like that, meaning Andrew had clearly come back more than once. The expert also pointed out that Andrew had separated the soil by layers, then buried them back in the correct order, which explained why the grave looked so untouched. That level of planning was chilling. Katie's body was handed over to forensic examiners. Immediately, Andrew's story about the Coke can and the axe throw fell apart. Katie had died from blows to the head with a hatchet, not just one or two, but 12 times. By that point, there was no doubt in the detectives' minds. This wasn't an accident. This was cold, calculated, and premeditated murder. With all of that evidence, the prosecution began preparing for trial. The case against Andrew was overwhelming, more than enough to secure a conviction. But one thing remained unclear: the motive. Investigators believed Andrew was fueled by bitterness and resentment. Katie had broken up with him months earlier, and it seemed his ego couldn't handle the rejection. That bruised pride, they believed, turned into hatred and ultimately led him to kill her. The trial began in November 2022, and at first, Andrew pleaded not guilty, but just 3 days in, he suddenly changed course. Out of nowhere, he reversed his plea and admitted to the murder. Unfortunately for Katie's family, he didn't offer any new details. He simply accepted responsibility, but it was still enough. In the end, the court sentenced Andrew Burfield to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 32 years, calling him a deeply dangerous individual. The case was officially closed. Caitlin Coons first met Jonathan Jones when she was only 15 years old, and he was 30. Their relationship would soon spiral into something deeply troubling. Caitlin, who had spent much of her young life in Ohio's foster care system, she was living in a group home in Canton when she first encountered Jonathan. She had faced numerous challenges throughout her childhood, bouncing between foster families and care facilities. She desperately seeking stability and someone who would truly care for her. Like many children in state custody, she had experienced multiple placements, each bringing its own disappointments. These constant moves had left her feeling abandoned, creating deep emotional wounds that made her vulnerable. Caitlin couldn't help but hope that each new placement would provide the loving, stable environment she craved, but these hopes were repeatedly dashed. Jonathan, 15 years her senior, seemed to offer the attention and affection that Caitlin had been searching for. However, their relationship was far from appropriate or legal. At 30, Jonathan was a grown man who should have known better than to pursue a romantic relationship with a 15-year-old girl. Caitlin couldn't help but be drawn to someone who appeared to understand her struggles and offered her the emotional connection she had been craving. What she didn't realize was that she was becoming involved with a predatory man who would ultimately lead her down a dark and destructive path. As their relationship developed, it became increasingly clear that Jonathan was taking advantage of Caitlin's vulnerable state. Caitlin's unstable past made her emotionally vulnerable, and she became dependent on Jonathan, who took advantage of her youth and desire for love. Jonathan manipulated Caitlin by exploiting her weaknesses. He told her she was mature, different, and their relationship was special. These tactics are commonly used by predators to make victims feel responsible for their own exploitation. Jonathan had complete control, and Caitlin became isolated, making it difficult for her to see that she was being manipulated and believed their relationship was genuine. Even though there were clear warning signs, her longing for love and inexperience with healthy relationships blinded her to the fact that she was being victimized. She saw Jonathan as her rescuer, the one finally giving her the love she desired. In March 2023, Jonathan's predatory behavior was exposed when he was convicted of enticing a child to view adult material and child endangerment. The court found that he had engaged in intimate with 15-year-old Caitlin and planned to sell photographs of their encounters. This revealed the extent of his exploitation and abuse. After the conviction, the court had ordered him to stay away from Caitlin and put a GPS tracker on him to monitor his location. Despite these efforts, tragedy was unavoidable. Nicole Jones, Jonathan's 53-year-old mother, lived in Sylvania Township. She was very worried about her son's relationship with the teenage girl, Caitlin. She was concerned about Jonathan's legal problems and the negative impact the relationship was having on both of them. As a caring mother, Nicole had seen her adult son making increasingly bad choices. She had tried to support him, but his relationship with a teenager and the resulting legal issues were almost too much to bear. Nicole felt stuck between her love for her son and her duty to protect a vulnerable young girl. The seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences of Jonathan's actions made her even more anxious. As a mother, Nicole had always tried to see the best in Jonathan, even when his behavior was clearly problematic. However, his relationship with Caitlin represented a new level of concern. The teenage girl was undeniably vulnerable and traumatized, and Jonathan appeared to be exploiting someone who needed protection. Nicole felt a sense of responsibility, not only for her son's actions, but also for Caitlin's welfare. She had repeatedly talked to Jonathan about the inappropriate nature of his relationship, pointing out the age difference and legal ramifications. She remained steadfast in her belief that Jonathan needed to end the relationship and seek help for the issues driving him to pursue someone so young and vulnerable. In April 2023, despite the court order, Caitlin made the fateful decision to leave her foster care placement in Canton. The 17-year-old girl, still deeply attached to Jonathan, couldn't resist what she believed was love. She met Jonathan at a local restaurant, and together they returned to his mother's home in Sylvania Township. Caitlin hoped this reunion would somehow make everything better, that they could find a way to be together without further problems. Nicole didn't know that Caitlin was secretly living in her house. Caitlin had climbed in through Jonathan's bedroom window and was hiding from Nicole. This created a stressful and difficult situation, as Caitlin was living a secret life in Nicole's home, where Nicole was trying to live normally. This situation put a strain on everyone. Nicole was unaware of everything happening in her own home, and it was becoming harder to keep Caitlin hidden. Caitlin had to stay quiet during the day and avoid being seen. Caitlin grew frustrated with the secrecy and the constant fear of being discovered, and she realized that this situation couldn't last. As days passed, the strain of keeping Caitlin's presence hidden became increasingly difficult. Jonathan knew it was only a matter of time before his mother discovered Caitlin's presence, and he knew his mother would not approve. It was evident that Nicole was genuinely concerned about both Jonathan's welfare and Caitlin's. However, her attempts to intervene and protect them would ultimately put her in grave danger. The tension in the household reached a breaking point when Caitlin became convinced that Nicole was the primary obstacle to her being with Jonathan. Warped by trauma and manipulation, Caitlin was unable to see that Nicole's concerns were legitimate and protective. Instead, she viewed Nicole as an enemy, deliberately trying to destroy her relationship. This perception fueled increasingly dark thoughts about how to eliminate the perceived obstacle. On April 19, 2023, Caitlin's frustration and desperation reached a dangerous crescendo. She made a decision that would forever change multiple lives. Caitlin gave Jonathan an ultimatum that was both shocking and terrifying in its cold calculation. Jonathan had 5 hours to kill his own mother, Nicole, or she would end their relationship forever. This demand was so extreme and disturbing that it revealed the depth of Caitlin's psychological disturbance and the toxic nature of their relationship. Jonathan, faced with this impossible choice, found himself paralyzed by fear and indecision. Although he had made numerous poor choices in his life, including his predatory relationship with Caitlin, the prospect of murdering his own mother was apparently beyond even his moral boundaries. As the 5-hour deadline approached, Jonathan could not bring himself to harm the woman who had given him life and had tried to help him throughout his struggles. Caitlin wanted Jonathan to kill Nicole. When he refused, she gave him an extra hour, hoping he would change his mind. But Jonathan still didn't act. So, Caitlin decided she would kill Nicole herself. She believed that for her relationship with Jonathan to work, Nicole had to die. Despite feeling troubled and pressured, she resolved to commit the murder since Jonathan wouldn't. On the evening of April 19, 2023, Nicole Jones stood in her kitchen, facing her refrigerator. Unbeknownst to her, Caitlin was outside and had found a large rock. Caitlin brought the rock inside, intending to use it as a weapon. Nicole continued her usual evening routine, completely unaware that Caitlin was about to end her life in a shocking and violent way. Her kitchen, normally a place of comfort, was about to become the scene of a brutal crime. As Nicole stood, with her back turned, focused on whatever she was retrieving from the refrigerator, Caitlin approached from behind with the rock in her hands. In a moment of pure evil and violence, Caitlin began bludgeoning Nicole over the head with the rock, striking her multiple times with brutal force. The attack was swift and merciless, giving Nicole no opportunity to defend herself or even understand what was happening. As if the bludgeoning wasn't enough to ensure Nicole's death, Caitlin then strangled her, making certain that she would never again interfere in her relationship with Jonathan. Jonathan was in the living room when his girlfriend, Caitlin, murdered his mother in the kitchen. Instead of calling for help or trying to save her, Jonathan chose to help Caitlin hide the crime. This decision made him an accomplice in a shocking murder case. They worked together to dispose of Nicole's body. They drove to 2 local stores, purchasing a tarp and garbage bags to wrap Nicole's lifeless body. They returned to the house and wrapped Nicole's body in the materials they had purchased. After wrapping the body, Jonathan and Caitlin loaded Nicole into the trunk. In perhaps one of the most disturbing details of this case, prosecutors later revealed that Jonathan and Caitlin actually went out to dinner while Nicole's body remained in the trunk. Following their dinner, they drove to a nearby apartment complex and disposed of Nicole's body in a dumpster, treating her as mere garbage to be discarded. The dumpster was collected the following day as part of the normal garbage pickup, and Nicole's body was taken to a landfill. Even though law enforcement searched thoroughly, Nicole's body was never found. This prevents her family from having the closure they would get from a proper burial. With Nicole's body disposed of, Jonathan and Caitlin decided to flee the area to avoid prosecution. They took Nicole's 2021 Buick Encore and began driving west, eventually crossing the border into Mexico. Along with the car, they also took Nicole's social security card, identification, credit cards, and health insurance card, essentially stealing her identity along with her life. However, their escape was short-lived. Caitlin, perhaps overwhelmed by the magnitude of her actions, made a critical error that would lead to their capture. While on the run, she contacted one of her caregivers and confessed to the murder. admitting that she had killed Jonathan's mother. This confession prompted the caregiver to immediately contact law enforcement, who began working with U.S. Marshals to track down Jonathan and Caitlin. The search for Jonathan and Caitlin became an international manhunt, with law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border cooperating to locate them. Fortunately for investigators, Jonathan was still wearing the Jeep's tracking device, mandated as part of his earlier conviction. This device allowed authorities to track their movements and ultimately locate them in the municipality of Ahumada, in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico, on May 8, 2023, approximately 3 weeks after Nicole's murder. U.S. Marshals and Mexican authorities successfully apprehended both Jonathan and Caitlin. They were found in possession of Nicole's vehicle and personal documents, providing further evidence of their guilt. Jonathan and Caitlin was extradited back to the United States to face charges for their roles in Nicole's brutal murder. Before, back in Ohio, law enforcement had been conducting a thorough investigation into Nicole's disappearance and presumed death. The investigation had begun on May 5, 2023, when Canton Police contacted Sylvania Township Police requesting a welfare check on Nicole Jones. When officers arrived at her condominium, they were unable to locate her despite conducting a thorough search of the premises. As the investigation unfolded, the true horror of what had transpired became clear. Detective Jake Albright of the Sylvania Township Police Department interviewed Caitlin extensively after her arrest, and she provided detailed confessions about how she had murdered Nicole. The case against both Caitlin and Jonathan was overwhelming. In addition to Caitlin's confessions, investigators had Jeep's tracking data from Jonathan's ankle monitor that corroborated the timeline of events and their movements after the murder. Surveillance footage from the stores where they purchased supplies further supported the prosecution's case against them. Initially, prosecutors charged Caitlin with aggravated murder, abuse of a corpse, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. Given the serious nature of the charges and the calculated manner in which the crime was committed, the court decided to charge Caitlin as an adult. Despite her being only 17 at the time of the murder, Jonathan faced even more charges, including 2 counts of aggravated murder, felonious assault, aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. However, as the case moved through the legal system, both defendants ultimately decided to accept plea agreements rather than face trial. On June 4, 2024, both Caitlin Coons, now 18, and Jonathan Jones, 33, appeared in Lucas County Common Police Court before judge. They each pleaded no contest to charges of aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. As part of the plea agreement, prosecutors agreed to dismiss the remaining charges against both defendants. The judge sentenced each of them to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. While this sentence ensures that both will spend decades behind bars, it also means that they could potentially be released while still relatively young, a thought that brings little comfort to Nicole's grieving family. During the sentencing hearing, the impact of Nicole's murder on her family became painfully clear. Nicole's brother, Robert Jones, who is the administrator of her estate, spoke about the devastating effect her loss has had on their family. Lucas County Prosecutor Julia Bates addressed the case following the sentencing, acknowledging the horror of what had transpired and expressing hope that the resolution would bring some measure of peace to Nicole's family. She said, "This was a horrific event." In her statement, they are relieved to reach a resolution in this case. They hope this brings some measure of peace to Nicole Jones's family. May her memory forever live in their hearts. As a result of this case, Robert Jones, representing Nicole's estate, has filed a civil lawsuit against Caitlin and Jonathan for wrongful death. The lawsuit seeks $25,000 in damages, in addition to punitive damages and other expenses. The suit acknowledges that no amount of money can truly make up for Nicole's death and the way it occurred. A tragic part of this case is that Nicole's body has never been found. Her family has been deprived of the fundamental right to give her a proper burial and have a place to remember and honor her. Not knowing where Nicole's remains are located intensifies their suffering. This case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can result from predatory relationships and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Caitlin, who began as a victim of Jonathan's inappropriate pursuit when she was just 15, ultimately became a perpetrator of one of the most brutal murders imaginable. While this transformation does not excuse her actions, it highlights the complex dynamics that can develop when adults prey upon children who are already struggling with trauma and instability. The residents of Sylvania Township, especially those in Nicole's condominium complex, were deeply disturbed by the terrible crime. Many residents are elderly and had moved there because they thought it was a safe and peaceful place to live. The shocking murder of their neighbor by her son and his teenage girlfriend destroyed their feeling of safety and showed that violence can happen anywhere, even in quiet communities. As this case comes to a close with the sentencing of both perpetrators, Nicole Jones's family continues to struggle with their immense loss. It was evident to everyone that Nicole Jones was a caring mother who had tried to protect both her son and the teenage girl her son was exploiting. Her concern for their welfare ultimately cost her life as she became the victim of a crime so brutal and senseless that it continues to shock all who learn about it. One ordinary afternoon on a deserted Queensland beach, a young woman walks her dog and never returns. The next morning, her father discovers her body partially buried in the sand, naked, with clear signs of a struggle to the death. No witnesses, no cameras, no cries for help, just a dog tied to a tree and a car still sitting quietly at the beach entrance. From there, Australia is drawn into a thrilling, years-long case, with the suspect fleeing to the other side of the world, ambiguous confessions, and a series of secrets from the victim's personal life gradually revealed who killed Toya Cordingley and why. In today's video, we take a look at the entire story of the Toya Cordingley case. We will start from the last moment she was alive, then go through the investigation, the search for the killer, and finally, the unsolved mysteries after more than 6 years. This is a heartbreaking story about searching for the truth. Toya Cordingley, born in 1994, grew up in Cairns, a city in northeastern Australia, with her parents, Troy and Vanessa. From a young age, she showed great compassion for people and animals. Toya attended local schools, completed a pharmaceutical program, and worked in a pharmacy. Despite her busy schedule, she always made time for animals. She volunteered at the Paws and Claws Animal Shelter, providing care, walking dogs, and cleaning. Her colleagues remember her dedication. She never missed a shift and often returned to check on sick animals. Toya's love for animals extended beyond volunteering. She advocated for their protection, promoted spaying and neutering, condemned cruelty, and encouraged shelter adoptions. At the time, Toya was in a relationship with Marco Heidenreich, with whom she lived. They spend weekends together, go on picnics, and share photos on social media. However, some of Toya's friends revealed that she had expressed doubts about the relationship and was considering breaking up. On October 21, 2018, 24 years old, Toya went to Wangeti Beach, a remote beach between Cairns and Port Douglas in Queensland, Australia. She was taking care of India, her boyfriend's dog. As the sun set, Toya arrived at the beach, parked her dark-colored Mitsubishi Lancer, leashed India, and began walking along the sand. No one directly witnessed her walk, but her presence was confirmed by phone tracking data and evidence found at the scene. The next morning, Toya's car was still parked at the beach entrance, indicating something was wrong. India was found tied to a tree near the parking area. India was unharmed, But the situation was concerning. Toya's wallet was inside the car, but her phone was missing. When Toya didn't return home or respond to calls or messages, her loved ones became worried. Her mother and friends spent the night trying to contact her without success. On the morning of the 22nd of October, they went to Wangeti Beach and realized Toya hadn't simply wandered off. The abandoned car, the tied-up dog, and the lack of contact indicated a serious problem. Wangeti Beach is a remote, unlit area with few nearby homes. These conditions made nighttime search difficult. By the morning of the 22nd of October, dozens of people had gathered at the beach. Toya's family, friends, and community members organized a search effort, combing through the beach, dunes, trails, and brush. A sense of urgency and dread filled the air. Everyone sensed this wasn't a simple case of someone getting lost. Toya's father, Troy Cordingley, joined the search team early that morning. He separated from the group and walked towards the area where the sand met the scrubland. There, he noticed disturbed sand. Kneeling down, he brushed the sand away and uncovered the body of a young woman, his daughter, Toya. Her body was lying on its side, partially buried, and she was not clothed. Her personal belongings were missing. There were visible signs of trauma, including bruising and abrasions, suggesting she had been overpowered. There was no object nearby that could explain what happened. It was clear someone had tried to conceal the crime. Law enforcement secured the area immediately and began initial forensic procedures. Investigators documented footprints in the sand, examined the surrounding area, and interviewed people who might have seen Toya the previous day. A key observation was the absence of drag marks, suggesting the crime occurred close to where her body was found. The person responsible had either been waiting for her or encountered her by chance. A formal report of a violent crime was filed, and the collection of physical evidence began. Samples of sand, shoe prints, and biological material were collected from within a roughly 160-foot radius. Based on the scene, authorities suspected the motive might have involved intentional violence. However, they did not immediately confirm this to the public. The news of Toya's death quickly spread throughout the community. Local media reported the tragic death of a young woman at a secluded beach, causing public alarm. Many women in the Cairns area became afraid to walk alone. Authorities publicly promised to do everything possible to identify the person responsible and bring them to justice. Police began reviewing surveillance footage from highway cameras, shopping centers, and public areas to trace Toya's movements in the hours before her death. At the same time, DNA samples were being collected for comparison with the evidence found at the scene. Toya's body was transported to Brisbane for a thorough forensic examination to determine the exact cause and time of death, and to look for any signs of targeted violence. From that point on, the case was handled by detectives, forensic analysts, and medical examiners. Surveillance footage showed that Toya had stopped at Rusty's Market in Cairns to buy groceries before going to the beach. She was seen leaving with a bag and walking calmly to her car. Nothing about her behavior or the people around her seemed unusual. Additional footage from cameras along the Captain Cook Highway, which leads to Wangeti Beach, provided only a partial view. There were no surveillance cameras in the area around the beach, making the investigation more difficult. Authorities asked the public for any dashcam footage recorded on the 21st of October between 10 o'clock a.m. and 11 o'clock p.m., especially footage of vehicles near the beach turnoffs or along the coastal road. Investigators carefully reviewed all the received footage, comparing timestamps and vehicle types. Some videos helped track a few cars that entered and exited the beach area that day. One of these was a white SUV, but the driver was identified, interviewed, and ruled out as a suspect. However, several vehicles remained unidentified despite public appeals, and the repeated release of video stills through the media, in addition to reviewing surveillance footage, authorities were actively seeking potential witnesses, such as people who might have been fishing, walking, or relaxing on the beach that day. Officers questioned people who had visited nearby parking areas, gas stations, and convenience stores. Unfortunately, no one reported seeing Toya at the beach that evening. This led investigators to believe that the crime likely occurred in a remote and less visited area of the coastline. Detectives searched for Toya's missing clothing, athletic leggings, a t-shirt, flip-flops, and a rubber bracelet. Despite thorough searches, none of these items were found. Police asked residents to check their properties, ditches, wooded areas, and roadsides for anything unusual. Some tips were received, but none led to items connected to the case. A medical examination revealed evidence suggesting a violent assault. Law enforcement didn't immediately confirm this publicly, but leaked documents indicated a possible targeted attack before Toya's death. Neck injuries, bruising, and the body's position supported this theory. DNA samples from the body and surrounding area were sent to a Brisbane lab. The results were important, but no matches were found in criminal databases. The lack of evidence and witnesses caused frustration in the media and online. People speculated and shared theories. Meanwhile, investigators continued working, hoping for a breakthrough. Police investigated every lead, tracking routes, verifying alibis, and examining social connections. Several weeks after Toya's death, the investigation focused on Rajwinder Singh. He was an Australian citizen of Indian descent, living in Innisfail, 90 minutes from the crime scene, and working as a nurse. He was suspected due to several remarkable coincidences, including his behavior at the time of Toya's disappearance. On 21 October 2018, when Toya went missing, cell tower data showed he was near Wangeti Beach. This matched the time Toya was believed to be there. Investigators were also concerned that Rajwinder stopped going to work without notice and abruptly left his home, wife, and sons. The following day, 22 October, he abruptly left Australia. He bought a one-way ticket to Delhi and boarded the flight without telling his employer or friends. He traveled light, and the booking was rushed. Since there were no formal charges against him, the border agents couldn't stop him. He left behind his wife's passport, belongings, and medical records without explanation. Once DNA results came back, authorities found a strong match with samples from Rajwinder. Footprints matching his were also found near the crime scene, giving investigators reason to issue charges. However, Rajwinder was already in India and couldn't be reached through official channels. He wasn't responding to communications and, according to Australian officials, no longer lived at his registered address. Investigators reviewed Rajwinder's medical history, which showed he'd sought treatment for hand injuries shortly after Toya's disappearance. These included cuts and bruises, which experts believed could have come from a physical fight. Forensic findings confirmed that Toya had fought back. Her body showed signs of a struggle, including defensive marks on her arms and face, likely from the attack. Rajwinder's actions after leaving Australia were suspicious. He didn't settle in one place or register with local authorities in India. Relatives reported he moved frequently and rarely stayed home. He sometimes pretended to be a pilgrim to stay in temples and used fake names. Living without identification helped him avoid police attention. His wife and sons stayed in Australia. He communicated with his family rarely and vaguely. His wife said she didn't know the details of the crime, but noticed he became withdrawn and tense before he disappeared. By the time Rajwinder was publicly named, Australian police had gathered a lot of evidence. They got an arrest warrant and asked Interpol for help. Rajwinder was put on an international wanted list. Australia asked India to extradite him, but Indian officials said they needed a completed pre-trial investigation and detailed evidence first, this began a long period of Rajwinder avoiding capture. Indian police occasionally received tips about his location, but they couldn't catch him. In Australia, the case was still a major public concern. Each mention of Rajwinder's name led to renewed public pressure on the government to speed up the extradition. Meanwhile, the investigation into the Toya case focuses on two things: collecting and analyzing evidence in Australia and working with Indian authorities. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Australian officials increased pressure. The Queensland government provided more money to speed up the investigation. In November 2021, the police chief announced a reward of $1 million Australian dollars for information leading to Rajwinder's capture. He emphasized that solving Toya's case was a high priority. The reward got attention in Indian media. As the story spread, new tips about Rajwinder's possible location came in. Some reports said he was seen in religious communities in Punjab, while others suggested he was hiding with relatives under a false name. Australian authorities shared this information with Indian police, leading to several searches. In November 2022, 4 years after the crime, Rajwinder was finally arrested in Delhi. He was found in the Janakpuri area, walking alone without identification. He didn't resist arrest. At first, he denied being Rajwinder Singh, but after being identified, he admitted he was the man who had fled Australia in October 2018. His arrest was officially confirmed. India's Ministry of Home Affairs announced that the extradition process had begun. Rajwinder was jailed in Delhi and given a lawyer. In his first court appearance, he said he didn't want to be extradited to Australia because he didn't trust the legal system and feared bias. This started a long legal process that lasted for months. Australia increased its diplomatic efforts. International law experts were brought in. Authorities formally documented all reasons for extradition, including expert reports and case materials. For the first time since Toya's death, there was a real chance the suspect would face trial. But there were still many legal procedures, appeals, and questions about citizenship. During one interrogation, Rajwinder surprisingly admitted to being involved in the crime. The statement was recorded. However, a few days later, he changed his story, saying his confession was forced and untrue. He claimed he had nothing to do with Toya's death. In a written statement, Rajwinder claimed the case was more complex than investigators suggested. He proposed a strange theory. There were 2 offenders and 2 victims at Wangeti Beach, implying he only witnessed someone else's actions. This theory lacked evidence, but intrigued his lawyers and complicated the legal proceedings. The Indian court agreed to hear Rajwinder's claim, further delaying the case. The legal process stalled repeatedly. Hearings were postponed, and the defense filed numerous objections, citing concerns about Rajwinder's rights. Despite this, in 2023, an Indian court approved the extradition request, determining that the documents from Australian authorities met international standards, allowing Rajwinder to be returned for trial. India's Minister of Home Affairs gave final approval. Preparations then began for Rajwinder's secure transfer. In November 2023, he was formally handed over to Australian law enforcement and brought to Queensland. State police officials met him and placed him in a secure detention facility. The flight and transfer were kept secret to prevent leaks or interference. Soon after arriving, formal charges were filed against Rajwinder, primarily for the intentional killing of Toya. Accordingly, on October 21, 2018, the court ordered Rajwinder to remain in custody without bail. Prosecutors emphasized that Rajwinder had previously fled the country, evading justice for years, making him a flight risk. They also highlighted the seriousness of the violent crime and its cruelty. With Rajwinder back in Australia, trial preparations officially began. Authorities assured the public of a transparent legal process. Meanwhile, new details from the case files, previously confidential, emerged. One revelation involved Toya's personal life. She had contact with another man named Tyson, a footcare specialist. This detail was initially overlooked until investigators analyzed messages and phone data months after the incident. It revealed Toya might have had a romantic relationship outside of her partnership with Marco. Toya and Tyson began communicating casually a few weeks before the incident, exchanging online messages that soon became personal and emotionally open. Investigators found direct and vulnerable messages from Toya in chat histories and archived social media. She shared her emotional struggles, doubts about her relationship with Marco, and her desire for change. In one message, she expressed her frustration and mentioned Marco's tantrums, saying he was losing control again, that she didn't feel safe, and that maybe it was time to end it. Another message expressed her wish for a break from the pressure. While no message directly accused Marco of wrongdoing, they showed emotional strain and Toya's growing distance from him. She also told Tyson she was hiding their conversations. Initially, investigators lacked this information because Toya's phone had missing chat records, and her messaging app didn't automatically back up deleted content. Advanced digital forensics recovered some erased data, revealing that Toya had kept parts of her life private from Marco and that her behavior may have appeared distant or suspicious to him. This was a key breakthrough. With this new evidence, investigators re-examined Marco, who had previously been considered only a witness. The hidden messages and relationship tension prompted a re-evaluation of his alibi and movements on the day Toya disappeared. The timeline shows Marco was in Cairns when Toya disappeared. Work records and surveillance footage partially confirmed this. However, new messages prompted police to re-examine these records, focusing on the period between 2:00 p.m. and 9:00 p.m., when Toya was likely at the beach. During those hours, Marco's phone activity decreased sharply. He became unresponsive to messages and later sent an unusual text. Additionally, a report surfaced that his car was seen near the Captain Cook Highway exit that evening, contradicting his statement that he stayed within central Cairns. These inconsistencies led to a second round of questioning. Marco confirmed being in Cairns, but struggled to explain the gaps in his movements. He denied involvement in Toya's disappearance and claimed ignorance of her relationship with another man. Although there wasn't enough evidence to charge him, his answers raised concerns and warranted further investigation. Investigators then cross-referenced movement data for everyone mentioned in Toya's communications, including phone records, travel patterns, surveillance footage, and witness statements. Tyson's location was verified in another city, making it impossible for him to be near the scene. He was ruled out as a suspect. This information led investigators to believe Toya was experiencing significant internal conflict before her disappearance. These findings were added to the case file, despite the main suspect, Rajwinder Singh, being in custody. Investigators didn't rule out the possibility of other individuals being involved. Questions about motives, emotional dynamics, and hidden details remained. 6 years after Toya's death, the case went to trial on the 22nd of July, 2024, at the Cairns District Court, attracting significant public attention. Despite substantial evidence, no verdict has been reached. The prosecution argues that Rajwinder acted alone, committed the crime with extreme cruelty, and fled the country to avoid justice. They suggested the motive involved inappropriate intent that escalated, but direct evidence of this is limited and remains unresolved. The defense argues that the case is based on circumstantial evidence. Rajwinder's attorneys maintain his innocence, claiming his prior confession in India was coerced and made without legal representation. They highlighted the lack of eyewitnesses and questioned the interpretation of DNA evidence. arguing it doesn't conclusively prove his involvement. A cryptic statement Rajwinder made during his extradition added complexity, but he later refused to elaborate, and his legal team unsuccessfully tried to have it excluded. Witnesses include police officers, forensic experts, medical professionals, Toya's former co-workers, and people who interacted with Rajwinder in India. However, key question persists. Could someone else have been involved? How significant were the tensions between Toya and Marco? Why hasn't an eyewitness come forward? These questions fuel public debate, but aren't formally part of the current charges. The hearings continue, and the judge is reviewing all evidence. Questioning is ongoing, and forensic experts are still submitting findings. Toya's parents are present at the proceedings but haven't made public statements. Their quiet presence emphasizes the personal impact of the trial. The court's eventual verdict will conclude a long and painful process. For now, the case remains open, marked by unanswered questions, arguments, and the hope that the truth will emerge through the justice system. On a day in early 2021, San Diego police received an unusual call from a woman reporting that her stepfather was missing. At first, everyone thought it was an old man who got lost. But just a few days later, what they found in the backyard of that house revealed a controversial story: a wrapped and carefully hidden corpse. The adopted daughter, Jade, quickly became a murder suspect. And it all started with a gruesome secret buried in a computer, what pushed both fates to a dead end. Let's explore the whole story to get the answer. After the call, a patrol was sent to her home. Jade greeted the officers outside the home, acting polite and reserved. Inside, the house appeared spotless and orderly. But beneath this surface of normalcy lay a reality far darker than anyone could have expected. In truth, this story had begun long before the disappearance, and its ending would prove to be far more horrific than imagined. Jade Jenks, a California native, was raised primarily by her father, her sole guardian since childhood. He provided stability, care, and unwavering support. Her relationship with her mother was far more complicated. Due to addiction and mental health struggles, her mother was often unable to give Jade the consistent care she needed. Still, Jade made efforts to maintain contact, visiting her mother when possible. When Jade was 14, her mother, Jenny, met Tom Merriman, who will become her stepfather. Tom was older, employed, and outwardly responsible. When Jade's half-brother, Cash, was born, she felt a deep affection for him and wanted to spend as much time with him as possible. At first, Tom was simply her mother's new partner, not playing much of a fatherly role. Their interactions were polite but distant. Over time, though, mutual respect and shared experiences forged a bond between them. Tom even began referring to Jade as his daughter. When Jenny relapsed and missed Cash's first school assembly, Jade realized she needed to step up. She made the difficult but brave choice to move in with Tom and Cash. Taking on the role her mother could no longer fulfill, Jade became the caretaker of the household, cleaning, managing daily routines, and raising her younger brother. This shared responsibility through difficult times brought Jade and Tom closer together. They worked side by side to navigate the chaos her mother's instability created. For Jade, Tom became more than just a stepfather. He was a stable, trusted father figure. After Jenny was taken into custody, Jade stayed with Tom and Cash. They moved into a new home, hoping for a fresh start. By then, Jade was in her early 20s. She continued managing the household and taking full responsibility for her brother. In many ways, Jade had lived between two worlds, one with the consistent love and stability of her father, and another where she was forced to take on adult responsibilities long before her time. Tom was her anchor in the latter world, Their bond became one of deep trust and dependence. That bond, however, would later make the events that unfolded even more disturbing. Tom Merriman, a 64-year-old resident of Solana Beach in San Diego County, was known as a man of strong character and discipline. He had 3 biological sons, but often spoke of having 4 children, always including Jade as his daughter, despite their lack of blood relation. For years, Tom worked in palm tree cultivation, but in 2011, he shifted his career, partnering with a colleague to launch a butterfly farm. The farm specialized in plants designed to attract butterflies, and it became especially successful when people spent more time at home and turned to gardening. Tom was admired for his passion, professionalism, and meticulous care of every plant on his farm. Customers praised him, colleagues respected him, and he was seen as a man who truly loved what he did. But behind this professional success, his personal life told a very different story. Tom was grappling with serious health complications. Years of alcohol misuse had left a devastating impact on his liver and heart. Outwardly, he maintained the appearance of being functional and productive, but behind the scenes, he was under constant medical supervision and dependent on powerful medications. By late 2020, things became even more difficult. After undergoing eye surgery that temporarily impaired his vision, Tom suffered a fall that left him with injuries, requiring an extended stay in a rehabilitation facility. During that time, Jade Jenks took on full responsibility for looking after the family, visiting regularly to keep things in order and prepare for Tom's return. Fully aware that he would not be able to manage on his own, when Jade moved into her mother's household years earlier, she quickly became an active part of the family's daily life. Living with Tom had settled into a routine. He provided financial support and was present from time to time, while Jade handled nearly everything inside the home. But beneath this surface of stability, tensions had begun to quietly build. Over time, Jade realized she was carrying far more than her fair share. She was managing almost all the responsibilities of the household, while Tom seemed increasingly detached. Even though he was the father of her younger brother, it was Jade who handled every detail of his upbringing. The weight of this imbalance left her feeling overwhelmed and resentful. What made matters worse were Tom's frequent, disparaging remarks about her biological father, a man Jade deeply respected and loved. Her father had raised her with stability and consistency, becoming her rock through life's challenges. Tom, however, often belittled her father, making unnecessary comparisons in an effort to paint himself as superior to Jade. It felt like a direct attempt to erase and replace her father's presence in her life. His words weren't just insulting, they were deeply disrespectful. The unease grew steadily. Jade struggled with the boundaries of her role. She didn't want to abandon her brother, who still relied on her, especially in their mother's absence. Yet, living in an environment where her efforts were ignored and her emotions dismissed became increasingly unbearable. Her contributions had turned into something taken for granted, with no acknowledgement, no gratitude. Eventually, Jade made the decision to move out. It wasn't impulsive, but the result of years of built-up frustration and a longing to reclaim her independence. She shifted her focus to her career, carving out a life that was fully her own. Though she stayed in touch with Tom and her brother, her interactions with Tom remained formal and distant. Her bond with her brother remained strong, but she kept Tom at arm's length. For a while, it seemed like their shared story had quietly come to an end. But then, by sheer coincidence, life pulled them back together. Jade purchased a house on the very same street as Tom, just a few doors away. What began as casual encounters on the sidewalk slowly turned into short conversations, and eventually, occasional dinner invitations. Little by little, their connection began to rebuild. To outsiders, Their relationship appeared close and harmonious. Tom seemed genuinely grateful for her presence, especially as his health declined further. Jade didn't show visible signs of anger or resentment, and from the outside, it looked like they had managed to repair their bond. But beneath that surface, Jade's true feelings remained far more complicated. Though she resumed a familiar rhythm of communication with Tom, the warmth was gone. Her presence in his life seemed driven more by obligation than affection. She was polite, attentive, and considerate, but kept her emotions guarded. She was once again inside his home, but no longer felt like she belonged there. What others saw as harmony was little more than a fragile illusion, an uneasy truce hiding under the surface. It was under these conditions that the story took a drastic turn. In late December 2020, while Tom was recovering in a medical facility, Jade was tidying up his house. As she wiped down a table, she accidentally brushed against the computer. It had been in sleep mode, and the screen suddenly lit up. What appeared stunned her. It was a private, intimate photo of herself, fully exposed, one she had once sent years earlier to a former partner in confidence. At first, Jade tried to find a logical explanation, maybe a glitch, maybe a mistake, but it quickly became clear that this was no accident. The image had been deliberately set as the desktop background, filling the entire screen. It was intentional, not some random technical error. She froze, unsure how to respond. In the home of someone she had once trusted, she had just encountered a shocking invasion of her privacy. That moment became a turning point, one that permanently changed her perception of Tom. What she saw wasn't just deeply unsettling, it hinted at something potentially criminal. She had no way of knowing where the images had come from, or, more disturbingly, whether any of them had been taken when she was underage. Though more troubling discoveries still lay ahead, in that instant, Jade understood her life had just shifted irreversibly. Instead of leaving the house, Jade remained, shaken, but driven by the need to understand. She powered up the computer fully and began combing through its files. Outwardly calm, she was inwardly consumed by dread. Opening the file manager, she noticed several hidden folders, each locked with a password. To her shock, one opened. The password was the name of one of her pets. Inside were hundreds of photos, images of herself sorted by year. These were not casual snapshots. They were invasive, captured without her knowledge, in the bathroom, in the bedroom, during moments when she was changing clothes or simply relaxing at home. It was more than disturbing. It shattered her sense of safety. Each new discovery deepened her horror. Some appeared to have been taken with hidden cameras, perhaps surveillance devices installed in the house. At first glance, someone else might have assumed they were random internet images, but Jade knew better. She recognized herself instantly: the pajamas, the room decor, the subtle expressions, the everyday body language no one else should have seen. Her mind struggled to process the sheer volume. The initial shock gave way to horror, then to a deep physical revulsion. Her breathing grew ragged. A wave of nausea hit her, and it felt as though everything around her was collapsing. New folder, each new image only intensified the crushing realization that her life had been built on hidden surveillance and deception. Jade didn't call emergency services. In that moment, her actions weren't guided by logic or planning, but by raw emotion. She began deleting the files. One by one, she opened every folder and subfolder, scanning for duplicates or backups. Yet with each image erased came the painful understanding that this was something she could never delete from memory. Desperately, she searched for a way to destroy everything completely and permanently. Then she found an external hard drive. The realization hit instantly. This was likely where the bulk of the archive was stored. After plugging it in, she discovered the same folder structure, except this time The number of files was even greater. Jade deleted every image, then physically removed the hard drive. She struck it repeatedly with a heavy object until the casing cracked open. Wrapping it in a towel, she carried it outside and tossed it into a garbage bin. Only after making sure the data could never be recovered did she return inside and sink to the floor. Exhausted and unsure what to do next, what she had once thought of as her family now seemed like something else entirely. This wasn't just betrayal, it was the unraveling of everything she believed in. The collapse of the very values her life had been built upon. After destroying the hard drive, Jade found herself spiraling into a state she could no longer control. Sleep became impossible. Each time she closed her eyes, the images returned. In her mind, she saw her own body, familiar yet violated. Again and again, the same thoughts played on a relentless loop. He saw this. He saved this. He looked at it for years. She began to feel an unbearable sense of shame, as though something inside her was ruined, used, no longer her own. Even standing under the shower felt wrong. The water didn't cleanse her. It made her feel more exposed. She scrubbed her skin until it turned red, yet the discomfort remained. Every glance in the mirror carried the eerie sensation of being watched, not as a person, but as an object. That feeling sank deep into her sense of self and refused to let go. Jade lost her appetite completely. Just the thought of food made her stomach twist. Her mind was consumed by relentless, growing anxiety. Every sound outside the door, every footstep in the hall, felt like a threat. She strained to hear noises in the silence, checked the locks repeatedly, left the lights on. The fear never lifted, not even in daylight. One thought dominated everything. If Tom discovered she had found the photos and destroyed them, he would never forgive her. She was certain he was capable of anything, that he could take drastic action. She remembered his past behavior, the control, the harshness disguised as care, and realized how she had once mistaken it for protection. Evenings became the worst. To calm her panic, Jade spread a sheet of plastic she had found in Tom's garage across her bed. It made no rational sense, but it was a desperate attempt to feel clean, to feel safe. Sleep was impossible unless she stayed fully dressed. The lights on, a knife gripped in her hand through the night. Reality and fear blurred together. The paranoia only deepened. The possibility that Tom might discover what she had done became her greatest fear. Her life narrowed into a constant state of bracing for impact. Her body and mind locked in fight or flight. Doubt, panic, revulsion, and terror fused into something unbearable. Rational thought began to fray, and in that fragile state, Jade started planning her next move. Overwhelmed, she reached out to a man she barely knew. Someone she had met once at a party. They were not friends, only a vague memory attached to a phone number. She sent a brief message asking for help, offering no explanation. He read it, but never replied. An hour passed, then a day, and still nothing. His silence only deepened her isolation. No one knew what she was going through. The one person she reached for had either been frightened away or simply didn't want to get involved. Once again, Jade was left alone with her thoughts. One afternoon, she walked into a hardware store. In her basket were items she never imagined buying. Medications that could sedate, a rope, a shower curtain, gloves. Her heart pounded as the cashier glanced at her purchase but said nothing. She paid quickly and left. That night, Jade sat in her car, gripped by indecision. Should she leave? Just drive and never look back? But where could she go? She had no plan. No one to turn to. Only the fear that if she ran, Tom would remain, with backup copies of the images, still able to cause more harm. Inside her, a battle raged. A desperate urge to end it all against the terror of crossing that line. Committing such an act felt unbearable, yet so did the thought of living with what she had seen. Her life had become a closed loop with no way out. On the morning of December 31, Jade picked Tom up from the rehabilitation center. Despite his frailty and a recent incident of self-harm, doctors had approved his release with a signed waiver. Jade helped him collect his belongings and drove him home. Along the way, and once inside the house, she supported him carefully. He was far too weak to manage on his own. Back at the house, she prepared a comfortable space for him in a first-floor bedroom. She set out water, medication, and pillows. Everything seemed in order, but Jade already had a plan in motion. Along with his discharge, Tom had been prescribed zolpidem, a powerful sleep aid. Knowing its effects, especially in larger doses, Jade handed him several pills under the guise of helping him rest. Tom took them without question. She watched as the sedative took hold. His speech slurred, his movements slowed, and within less than an hour, he was unable to get out of bed. His eyes grew vacant, his breathing heavy. He was alive, but completely incapacitated. Jade sat by his side, calmly watching, without fear or visible emotion, fully aware of how helpless he had become. There was no turning back. Inside her, everything was still. Time, thought, doubt. The house was silent. No shouting, no confrontation, just him lying motionless in bed, and her quietly watching, holding the power to decide what came next. As Tom grew nearly unresponsive, too heavy for her to move alone, Jade realized she needed help getting him inside from the porch. She began sending messages. The first went to a man she had once been casually involved with, Adam Sipliak. She kept it simple. "Can you help me get my stepfather inside? He's not feeling well." Adam came quickly, but when he saw Tom barely responsive, he froze. He sensed immediately that something was wrong. Jade insisted, "Just help me carry him inside." That's all. Adam touched Tom, felt how unresponsive he was, then stepped back and left without a word. He never replied to her messages again. Jade then contacted another acquaintance, someone younger and more naive. She told him she needed help with some household tasks, but when he arrived and saw a nearly motionless man on the floor, paired with Jade's detached behavior, unease took over. He refused to get involved, saying the situation felt off, and left. Both men sensed danger, but neither called emergency services. They simply walked away, leaving Jade alone with Tom, who was still alive, though shallowly breathing, consciousness fading, body failing. Jade remained alone with him. She didn't act immediately. Hours passed after she managed to pull him back inside. He lay on the floor while she paced in circles, unable to make a final decision, yet far past the point of return. Late at night, she placed a plastic bag over his head. He didn't resist. Jade stood nearby, silently watching as his breathing slowed. Then, without a word, she tightened a rope around his neck. Everything happened in silence. Tom no longer moved. The next morning, she moved his body to her car. She wrapped it in fabric, tied it securely, and pushed it onto the back seat. The vehicle sat for hours, with the windows rolled up under the direct sun. Jade stayed inside the house, paralyzed with uncertainty. Her phone remained silent. No one was looking for Tom. Everything around her was eerily quiet. By evening, she dragged the body into the backyard. Among old boxes and discarded items, she carefully tucked it into a corner, concealed between crates, and covered it with debris. She arranged everything so it blended in, nothing that would draw attention. Then she went back inside and locked the door. A full day passed. Jade didn't leave the house. She ignored phone calls and messages, pretending nothing had happened. No one asked questions. Several more days went by. Tom hadn't contacted anyone, nor had he returned to the rehabilitation center. At first, staff weren't alarmed. Delays were not unusual, but by the third day, concern began to grow. On the fifth day, Jade finally called emergency services. Speaking calmly, she explained that she had been looking after a family friend, Tom. He had spent a few hours at her home after being discharged, then left and never came back. She said she was worried and had no idea where he might be. That call officially set the missing person investigation in motion. Officers arrived the same day. Jade greeted them at the door, polite but visibly tense. She repeated her story. A quick scan of the property and a cursory look inside revealed no obvious red flags, and there was no legal basis for a deeper search. Jade provided a description of what Tom had been wearing and gave his contact information. The next day, staff from the rehabilitation facility informed police that Tom had failed to collect essential documents and medication, and that his phone had been off for several days. This heightened their suspicions. Investigators visited Jade again, and this time the interaction felt different. Her earlier composure had begun to crack. She contradicted herself during questioning. When asked about recent communication with Tom, she admitted deleting their messages. That statement immediately raised concern for investigators. By the following morning, January 2, 2021, police had obtained a search warrant. With legal clearance, they began a detailed examination of Jade's house and yard. The initial sweep revealed very little. No signs of violence, no struggle, no traces of blood. Jade, looking exhausted, answered calmly but briefly, repeating that she had no idea where Tom had gone. The backyard, cluttered with boxes and construction debris, did not draw immediate attention. Investigators noted the mess but moved past it. Further searches that day turned up nothing. The next step was reviewing footage from neighboring security cameras. On one recording, investigators spotted a car pulling up to Jade's house the night Tom vanished. Later, someone was seen carrying an object wrapped in fabric out of the garage. The video quality was poor, but it was enough to raise serious suspicion. Police returned with a key -9 unit. The dogs became alert near the backyard, prompting investigators to re-examine a pile of boxes and tarps stacked in a corner near the alley. Beneath the tarp, they noticed the edge of a carpet. Under it was a body wrapped in cloth. The discovery marked a turning point in the case. Jade was inside the house when officers asked her to step out. At first, she acted confused, as if she didn't understand. When told a body had been found, her reaction was unusually calm. No panics, no tears, just tense silence. The deceased was quickly identified as Tom. Though the body had already begun decomposing, clothing and physical features matched. The investigators had not only digital evidence but also physical proof. Jade's home was sealed off. Her electronic devices were seized, and her message history recovered. Her status shifted from witness to suspect. Taken into custody, she underwent interrogation with an attorney present. She declined to give a statement, maintaining she had no idea how Tom had died and insisting their relationship had been positive until the end. While forensic teams worked, investigators turned to Jade's phone. Analysis uncovered messages where she asked acquaintances to help move Tom. 2 recipients confirmed receiving the texts and testified on Jade's Notes app. Authorities found a disturbing shopping list: gloves, bleach, plastic sheeting, rope. Receipts and surveillance footage confirmed she had purchased these items just days before Tom's death. On her laptop, searches were uncovered for zolpidem effects, toxic doses, and methods of suffocation without leaving signs. Forensic technicians detected Tom's DNA and fibers from his clothing on the carpet where the body had been hidden. On the plastic wrap, Jade's fingerprints were identified. Phone data confirmed she had picked Tom up from the hospital on the day of his death. During that drive, she sent a chilling message. "I've got him. Everything's going according to plan." A visual inspection of the body revealed no obvious trauma, but the autopsy told another story. The medical examiner identified clear signs of suffocation and zolpidem levels far beyond the therapeutic range. The official conclusion: Tom's death was caused by a combination of chemical sedation and asphyxiation. At that point, investigators had no doubt that Tom's death was not accidental. The case now centered on a premeditated act, carefully planned and executed. At the conclusion of the investigation, the district attorney formally charged Jade Jenks with first-degree murder. The case was extensive, supported by digital evidence, eyewitness testimony, and expert reports. The trial drew widespread public attention. Journalists filled the courtroom, and interrogation transcripts were widely circulated. Jade's character and motives became the subject of heated public debate. The prosecution built its case on a variety of evidence, including text messages, purchase history, and her actions before and after Tom's death. Prosecutors argued that Jade had deliberately orchestrated the killing and then tried to cover her tracks. The defense, in contrast, portrayed Jade as a victim. They argued that years of exploitation and betrayal at the hands of Tom had pushed her into emotional collapse and left her feeling hopeless. Jenks's attorneys proposed a plea deal, partial admission of guilt in exchange for a reduced sentence and the avoidance of life without parole. But the prosecution rejected the offer, pressing for the maximum penalty. When Jade took the stand for her final statement, she expressed no guilt for Tom's death. Instead, she said her only regret was not walking away from the situation sooner. After a week-long trial and several days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge, relying on forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the investigation's findings, sentenced Jade Jenks to 25 years to life in prison for Tom Merriman's murder. In his closing remarks, he acknowledged her personal trauma and emotional stress, but emphasized that she had no legal right to take justice into her own hands. Justice, he said, must be carried out within the framework of the law. Following the verdict, the prosecutor stated that justice had been served. He acknowledged the moral complexity of the case, but underscored that, from a legal standpoint, her actions could not be justified. Jade's defense attorneys announced their intention to appeal, arguing that the court had not fully considered the long-term psychological harm she had suffered. The verdict sparked public debate. Some supported the court's decision, stressing the need for legal accountability, while others expressed sympathy for Jade, believing she had been cornered by a system that had failed to protect her. One of the detectives later reflected, "It was one of the most difficult cases of his career. What happened there is too complicated for black and white judgments." But the fact that a life had been taken could not be ignored. Several months later, Jade's appeal was denied. The sentence was upheld. Finally, the Jade Jenks case was closed, leaving behind a heavy sentence and endless controversies. This is a warning: when falling into the tragedy of abuse or mental trauma, people need to seek help from the law and the community, instead of letting the obsession push them into the path of crime, because a wrong decision can destroy both fates and leave a wound that will never fade. Luton, Bedfordshire, United Kingdom. On the evening of Monday, May 23, 2016, a 34-year-old woman was brutally murdered inside her family home on Overstone Road. Saima Khan, a devoted mother of 4 young children, became the victim of a crime so savage that it shocked the entire community She had been stabbed 68 times. The wounds were so vicious that her head and arm were nearly severed. From the outside, the Khan residence looked like an ordinary, modern family home, blending in with the other houses in the quiet, suburban street. But inside, officers encountered a scene of horrific carnage. Blood was everywhere, as if gallons had been splattered across the walls, stairs, and floor. This story centers on the Khan family, originally from Pakistan. Saima, the elder, was born in 1982, while her younger sister, Sabah, was born 7 years later, in 1989. The family also included 2 brothers. They spent their early years in the Netherlands, but when Saima turned 18, the entire family relocated to England in search of better opportunities. The Khan household was traditional, yet modern. They maintained strong Islamic values and pride in their heritage, while also adapting to Western life. Both sisters grew up fluent in Dutch and later mastered English after the move. They shared a deep bond. Saima, known for her kindness and gentle nature, often looked after Sabah like a second mother. Sabah adored her older sister, once saying they were one soul divided between 2 bodies. When the family settled in Luton's Overstone Road, they joined a large Pakistani community. Luton, about 30 miles north of London, has one of the largest Muslim populations in the UK, with nearly a third of residents identifying as Muslim. Here, Saima pursued her dream of helping others by studying nursing. She had a natural gift for caregiving and wanted to dedicate her life to supporting those in need. After completing her training, she began working as a home care nurse. Patient described her as reliable, warm, and compassionate, a woman who radiated calm. The Khan family lived in a 2-story brick townhouse, typical of many European neighborhoods. Each apartment in this townhouse had a separate street-level entry. Such homes are commonly found in most European cities. By the time Saima turned 21, her parents began searching for a suitable husband for her. In keeping with tradition, they reached out to extended relatives in Pakistan. Arranged marriages are common among Pakistani families in the UK, sometimes even used as a means to secure British residency or citizenship. Many of these unions end unhappily, with young women, accustomed to Western freedoms, finding themselves in restrictive or even abusive marriages. But Saima's case was different. No one pressured her. She trusted her parents' judgment and agreed willingly. Family meant everything to her. She wanted to marry and start her own. Her future husband was Hafiz Rahman, a man 3 years older than her and 10 years older than Sabah. Hafiz had lived his entire life in Pakistan and was considered by relatives to be a respectable match for Saima. Hafiz's family hoped that moving to Britain would give him more opportunities and a better life. By marrying a British resident, Hafiz would be able to secure a British passport and become a full-fledged citizen of the United Kingdom. After the wedding in Pakistan, Hafiz and Saima returned together to the United Kingdom. The newlyweds moved into the Khan family home, following the cultural custom in many Muslim households of living as one large, close-knit family. Hafiz eventually gained citizenship and found work as a taxi driver. He held firmly to traditional values, expecting his wife to bear children, raise them, care for her husband, prepare meals, and manage the household. Saima, however, never intended to give up her career entirely. She balanced her duties as a wife with her work caring for patients. Not long after their marriage, she became pregnant with their first child, a daughter. Before she could fully recover from that pregnancy, more followed in quick succession. In the end, they had 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. 3 generations of the family lived together under one roof, supporting and caring for each other. In total, 11 people shared the townhouse. Hafiz, Saima, and their 4 children, Saima's parents, her 2 brothers, and her younger sister, Sabah. On the surface, life seemed to be going well, apart from the ordinary domestic disagreements that occur in any household, especially one so large. At some point, however, Sabah began to feel growing tension with her sister. The shift started after Saima's marriage to Hafiz. Once she became a wife and mother, Saima's priorities naturally changed. To Sabah, it felt like her sister no longer made time for her, focusing instead on her husband and children. Over time, Sabah grew weary of living in her older sister's shadow. Within this crowded household, a secret began to take shape. Known only to 2 people, Sabah had fallen in love with her sister's husband, Hafiz. Shockingly, he reciprocated, despite the 10-year age gap, despite the taboo of Sabah being his wife's younger sister, and despite the fact that they all lived together under one roof. The 2 embarked on a passionate affair. Their attraction quickly consumed them both. It started innocently enough, fleeting glances, playful teasing, the rush of a forbidden thrill. Hafiz, more experienced, recognized what lay behind the young girl's looks. In truth, he exploited her immaturity and naivety. The affair began shortly after the birth of Saima's first child. Exhausted and fully absorbed in caring for her newborn daughter, Saima didn't notice the way her younger sister was looking at her husband. At the time, the sisters still had a fairly warm relationship. Sabah even helped look after the baby, playing the role of a loving aunt, while secretly melting into the arms of her sister's husband. Whenever no one was watching, the secret relationship carried on for years. It would occasionally end, only to resume with even greater intensity as time passed. Sabah became increasingly obsessed with Hafiz. They relied on WhatsApp to communicate, the only way to conceal their affair within a household filled with family members. With each passing wave of passion, the relationship grew more volatile. As jealousy of her sister deepened, she was consumed with rage. Whenever she saw Hafiz giving Saima attention, she complained bitterly that he could message her day and night, yet could never find enough time to be alone with her. The affair was dangerously complicated. The tight-knit family, all living under one roof, turned the house into a pressure cooker, a volcano on the verge of erupting. And though the affair unfolded right under their noses, no one seemed to notice. Or perhaps they simply chose to look away, pretending nothing was wrong. Most likely, the relatives simply thought any possibility of an affair between Sabah and Hafiz was unthinkable. Their upbringing and faith didn't even allow them to imagine such a thing. Saima herself paid no attention to the strange glances between her husband and younger sister. She was a devoted mother of 4, juggling childcare with part-time caregiving work, exhausted and overburdened. She had neither the time nor the energy to keep watch over her husband, and she certainly never suspected such a betrayal from her own sister, whom she had loved, cared for since childhood. Meanwhile, Hafiz and Sabah would steal moments together whenever Saima was away. Sometimes they used the taxi Hafiz drove for work. Other times, they met in the family's marital bedroom. At that point, the children were 7, 4, 2, and 1 years old. Since Sabah often stayed home to help care for them, her presence in the bedroom didn't raise suspicion. Hafiz, with the flexibility of his taxi shifts, deliberately arranged his time off to coincide with his wife's working hours. Though their affair carried on for years, Hafiz still put his wife first. This infuriated Sabah. At one point, Hafiz even considered marrying Sabah as a second wife. But when he consulted a local imam, he was told it was forbidden in Islam to marry 2 sisters at the same time. So Hafiz abandoned the idea and continued meeting Sabah in secret. For him, she became the ultimate forbidden fruit, young, naive, and forbidden by custom from having any relationship before marriage to Hafiz. This only made the affair more intoxicating. A few months into the relationship, Sabah became pregnant. Hafiz, who refused to use contraception, insisted she terminate the pregnancy to avoid scandal and keep their affair hidden. Sabah went through with the abortion, but the experience left scars. It may also have been the moment Hafiz realized that continuing an affair with his wife's younger sister was unsustainable. By February 2016, after 4 years of secret meetings, Hafiz decided to end the affair and recommit to his wife and children. He began considering moving his family into their own home, away from the crowded household, but the very thought of losing him drove Sabah into despair. She couldn't bear the idea that Hafiz had chosen his wife and children over her. That desperation soon twisted into something darker. Sabah began obsessively searching online for ways to remove her sister from the picture. In her mind, Saima was the only obstacle between herself and Hafiz. Without Saima, Sabah imagined she could step into her place, becoming his wife and raising the children as her own. Her internet searches grew more alarming. She looked up where to buy venomous snakes, studied différents poisons, researched how to hire hitmen, and even pored over an article titled 16 Steps to End Someone's Life and Not Get Caught. In March 2016, Sabah reached out to a self-proclaimed sorcerer in Pakistan who claimed he could kill through black magic. Sabah paid the so-called sorcerer more than $6,000 to place a deadly curse on Saima. When nothing happened, Sabah grew furious. She contacts the self-proclaimed wizard again, complaining that her life is getting worse. Hafiz no longer cares about her and seems completely indifferent. She begged him to hurry and finish off her sister so that Hafiz would finally be hers. But after she sent the money for this final ritual, the sorcerer disappeared. He had been nothing more than an online scammer. Sabah couldn't bear the thought of losing Hafiz forever. To her, he was her soulmate, the man for whom she had broken Islamic rules, endured an abortion, and done things most women would never dare. Worse still, her parents had started pressing the issue of marriage for her. Talks had been ongoing for months, with a potential suitor already identified, but negotiations stalled because the families couldn't agree on the terms. Even so, the pressure was immense. As much as she loved Hafiz, openly defying her parents was nearly impossible. She felt trapped, beaten down by blow after blow. To make matters worse, she had to watch her sister Saima live the life everyone envied. A devoted husband, 4 beautiful children, and what looked like the perfect marriage. By contrast, Sabah was unmarried, childless, and directionless. Resentment festered, and soon her envy turned into rage. She began to blame Saima for everything that had gone wrong in her life. Those emotions drowned out any last trace of reason. For Sabah, it felt like her sister was stealing the very life she deserved. To her twisted mind, the only solution was to remove Saima from the picture once and for all. Meanwhile, Saima and Hafiz had found a new apartment across Luton where they planned to move with their children. The moving date was already set, May 25th, 2016. By then, Hafiz had grown colder towards Sabah, pouring more energy into repairing his marriage. In a desperate bid to win him back, Sabah sent him anguished love messages. She wrote that no force on earth could change her feelings, that her heart was bleeding for him, and that she would do anything to prove her devotion. But behind these messages lurked a darker determination. If Hafiz wouldn't come back to her willingly, she would carve her own path to a happy ending. Sabah decided to take matters into her own hands. On May 21st, 2016, she went to a supermarket and bought a large knife. She knew that on the evening of May 23rd, her parents, brothers, and Hafiz would all be away at a funeral at the local mosque, mourning a recently deceased relative. Saima couldn't attend because she had caregiving duties that night. Saba was left in charge of the children, a perfect setup for the plan she had been plotting. That night, once the children were asleep upstairs, the house was hers. She waited, knife ready, needing only to lure her sister home early. At 10:15 p.m., Saima left for work. Around 11, Saba sent her a text, pretending the youngest child was inconsolable and crying for her mother. 3 minutes later, Saima replied that she was on her way back. In reality, all 4 children were sound asleep. At 11:07 p.m., a neighbor's security camera caught Saima pulling into the driveway, stepping out of her car and walking toward the front door. Seconds later, the hallway light inside flicked on. 45 seconds after that, it went dark again. Within those few minutes, Saima Khan was ambushed in her own home. The moment Saima stepped through the front door and into the ground floor hallway, she had no idea that death was waiting just a few feet away. In an instant, her younger sister Saba lunged at her with the knife she had deliberately purchased the day before at the supermarket. Saima, caught completely off guard, lost those precious seconds that might have saved her life. She never expected her own sister to be the source of such danger, and the shock robbed her of the ability to defend herself. As the first blows landed, she struggled in vain, but the frenzied assault quickly overwhelmed her. Investigators would later confirm that Saima likely died within the first few minutes of the attack, screams that were quickly drowned out by the relentless violence of her assailant. Saba's rage knew no limits. She stabbed and slashed with such ferocity that by the end, Saima's body bore 68 separate wounds. The injuries were so savage that Saima's throat was cut almost completely through, leaving her close to decapitation. Even after her sister collapsed, Saba continued the onslaught, tearing off parts of her clothing and striking with such brutal force that one of Saima's arms was left hanging by little more than tissue and sinew. Upstairs, the eldest daughter was jolted awake. Frightened, she came to the top of the stairs and called out, asking her aunt what was happening. Sabah, in the middle of her gruesome act, snapped at the child, coldly ordering her back to bed and dismissing the horrific sounds as nothing more than her trying to catch a mouse. The little girl obeyed, unaware that her mother was being slaughtered just a few steps below. By then, Saima had lost massive amounts of blood. Several arteries in her jugular vein were severed. Her face, head, and arm were horribly mutilated. In the frenzy, Saba herself suffered a small cut, though she barely noticed. When the killing was over, she quickly moved on to the next phase of her plan, staging the crime as a robbery gone wrong. She smashed a pane of glass on the back door to make it look like an intruder had forced entry. Then she stripped off her bloodied clothing, stuffed it into a plastic bag along with the knife, Saima's phone, and some jewelry, and hid the items in her bedroom. Calmly, she showered, washing away the evidence of Saima's blood. Only after cleaning herself up did she call her parents and then dial emergency services. When her family rushed home, they were met with a nightmare. Saima lay in the hallway in a pool of blood, her life gone. The brutality of the scene shocked even the paramedics. The wounds were so severe that police initially believed the killer must have been a man. The first step for investigators was to question the only adult who had been in the house that night, Saima's younger sister, Sabah Khan. She recited her version of events with a calm, almost practiced tone. She explained, that evening, everyone else had been out. Her parents, brothers, and brother-in-law Hafiz had gone to a funeral at the mosque. While Saima had gone to work, Saba had stayed behind to watch the children. She told detectives that she had put the children to bed, though the youngest had fussed a little, prompting her to message Saima and ask her to come home sooner. By the time the baby fell asleep, Saba said she saw Saima's car pull into the driveway. Relieved, she decided to take a shower. According to her story, moments later, she heard a loud noise and her sister's screams. Throwing on a robe, she rushed downstairs and found Saima lying bloodied in the hallway. That was when she insisted. She phoned her parents and then called emergency services. When officers asked about the cut on her hand, she claimed she had injured herself on shards of glass near the broken back door. She said she hadn't seen or heard any intruder. On the surface, her explanation seemed plausible. The smashed glass, the missing jewelry, and the horrific scene were consistent with a violent burglary, yet detectives couldn't ignore the details that didn't add up. Saba's demeanor struck them as oddly detached, almost rehearsed. Given the brutality of what had just happened, her lack of visible grief or panic raised quiet suspicions. Though investigators reminded themselves that people cope with trauma in different ways, still, one fact remained clear. This was no ordinary crime. The sheer ferocity of the attack, dozens of stab wounds, the attempt to mutilate, did not resemble a panicked burglar. It looked personal. It looked like vengeance. The entire family experienced incredible grief from losing a loved one. Hafiz was beside himself. He spoke about how their shared dream of moving into a new apartment with their 4 children had been cruelly destroyed. Both he and Saima had been counting down the days to that move, looking forward to starting a happier chapter together. Now, that future had been stolen from them forever. Relatives, friends, and even police officers pleaded with the public for any information that might help track down the killer who had ripped away the life of a devoted mother. The whole community of Luton and the surrounding areas was shaken to its core. Hafiz himself gave an emotional statement, saying their family's hearts had been torn to pieces. What he didn't know at the time was that the true motive behind Saima's murder was tied to his own secret. The autopsy results painted a horrific picture. Saima had been stabbed 68 times. Forensic experts concluded that she likely died after the first few blows, but the attacker kept plunging the knife into her body again and again. Long after death, detectives were convinced this wasn't the work of a burglar. A random intruder would never waste precious time inflicting so many wounds after the victim was already gone. This was personal. This was rage. With that in mind, detectives decided to revisit the testimony of their key witness, Sabah Khan. Sabah had been close to her sister, and investigators wanted to hear her version of events again. During questioning, Sabah told them that Saima had a dark secret, a secret lover. She even suggested that this man might have been the one to ambush and murder Saima. But instead of deflecting suspicion, her story had the opposite effect. Detectives noticed how Sabah seemed almost eager to smear her sister's reputation at a time when Saima could no longer defend herself. The claim didn't sit right. Family members, neighbors, and friends had all spoken about Saima's character. They were adamant she would never cheat on Hafiz. In fact, her life revolved around her children, her husband, and her part-time job. She barely had the time, let alone the energy, to pursue an affair. Still, investigators considered every angle. Could this have been an honor killing? The sheer brutality of the attack led some to believe the perpetrator was male. To narrow down suspects, police mapped out the movements of each family member in the days before the crime and seized electronic devices from the household. It didn't take long before damning evidence began to surface. Detectives discovered that Sabah had recently purchased a knife at a local supermarket, the very same model used in the attack. A review of her Google searches and phone data revealed an even darker truth. Sabah had been carrying on a secret affair with Hafiz for the past 4 years. Their text messages left no doubt. Sabah had often written about her hatred and resentment toward her sister, even accusing Hafiz of marrying Saima only to secure a passport. Their relationship had become so volatile that Hafiz eventually blocked her on social media. The case was unraveling quickly. On May 31, 2016, just 8 days after Saima's murder, detectives conducted a thorough search of Sabah's bedroom. What they found erased any remaining doubt. Hidden inside were the pieces of jewelry supposedly stolen during the staged robbery. Even more damning, they uncovered Saima's missing phone, the blood-stained knife, and clothing Sabah had worn on the night of the murder. Still soaked in Saima's blood, Sabah was arrested immediately. At first, she denied having any part in Saima's death. Though she admitted to the affair with Hafiz, she tried to claim that the relationship had ended after a failed pregnancy and that she had distanced herself from him. Still, she clung to the story of a robbery gone wrong. But the irrefutable evidence found in her room made this claim difficult to support. After several rounds of interrogation, Sabah finally broke down. She confessed to killing Saima. In her statement, she painted herself as a victim, saying Hafiz had manipulated her for years, even abused her physically, and that she felt trapped in a relationship with a man 10 years older, more experienced, and impossible to resist. The trial took place in October 2017, and it was there that Sabah Khan finally admitted the truth. She pleaded guilty to the murder of her own sister. Prosecutors laid out the chilling details of her motive. What began as an infatuation with Hafiz Rahman had grown into a dangerous, obsessive fixation. She could no longer stand the fact that Hafiz belonged to someone else. In her mind, Saima's life looked flawless. Married, with children, and a stable home, while she herself remained in the shadows. That resentment turned into rage. Hafiz, taking the witness stand, described himself as a victim of manipulation. He admitted that he had made the grave mistake of giving in to Sabah's advances, but he claimed he had been trapped by her threats. According to him, Sabah often said she would harm herself if he ever left her, bombarding him with messages filled with desperate declarations of love. Despite his testimony about wanting to end things, prosecutors highlighted the undeniable fact that Hafiz had still continued sleeping with Sabah. Even in the days leading up to the murder, the defense tried to shift some of the blame onto Hafiz. Sabah's lawyer argued that Hafiz had taken advantage of a vulnerable young woman, one who had little experience with men and suffered from mental health struggles. He painted Sabah as lonely, unstable, and desperate, reminding the court that she had a history of self-harm. According to the defense, Hafiz had strung her along for years, feeding her false hope of a future together, only to retreat when things became too complicated. Sabah himself showed no remorse. Not a tear, not a trace of remorse. She sat motionless in the defendant's box, her face expressionless, her eyes hollow. It was clear she wasn't mourning Saima's stolen life. She was mourning her own freedom. Sabah Khan was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. The defense immediately sought an appeal, calling the sentence excessively harsh, but the appeals commission disagreed. The punishment, they said, was just. And so, Sabah Khan remains behind bars in Bedfordshire, UK, where she will spend the best years of her life reflecting on the crime that destroyed her family. After the trial, Hafiz released a statement. He said he could never have imagined such horror unfolding within his own family. He admitted his deep shame for betraying his wife and confessed that not a day passes without regret. Hafiz remembered Saima as a devoted wife, a loving mother of 4 beautiful children, a daughter who made her parents proud, and a sister whose kindness touched everyone around her. He sighed. Her death left a permanent wound in the hearts of everyone who loved her. For her parents, the pain was almost unbearable. Losing one daughter is tragedy enough. But learning that another daughter was responsible, that was a nightmare no family should ever endure. And that brings us to the end of this tragic story, a story of jealousy, betrayal, and a family torn apart forever.